She was hired to deliver a baby to a sterile widower, but couldn't leave after the birth. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She never thought her body would become her salvation, but desperate times call for desperate choices. Yanka Ellis adjusted her worn denim jacket as she stepped off the Greyhound bus in Napa Valley, the California sun hitting her dark skin with a warmth that felt foreign after months of traveling through colder states. Her canvas sneakers touched the pavement with the same cautious rhythm that had carried her through 27 years of life. Always ready to move, never ready to stay. The bus station smelled of diesel and stale coffee, nothing like the magnolia blossoms she remembered from Montgomery. She pulled one of her styled braids between her fingers, a nervous habit that betrayed the confidence she tried to project. The floral headscarf she'd chosen that morning, a small splash of color against her simple outfit, felt suddenly too bright, too hopeful for what lay ahead. Her phone buzzed. A text from the lawyer. "Mr. Moore will meet you at Riverside Diner on Main Street, 2 p.m. sharp." Yanka glanced at her cracked phone screen. 1:47 p.m. Just enough time to find the place and compose herself for the most unusual job interview of her life. The diner sat tucked between a vintage bookstore and a small pharmacy, its red vinyl booths visible through smudged windows. She pushed through the glass door, and a bell chimed overhead, the same sound that had followed her through countless similar establishments across the country. But this time felt different. This time she wasn't just passing through. She spotted him immediately. Cristiano Moore sat in the corner booth, his tall frame somehow making the space look smaller. Even seated, she could tell he was well over 6 feet. His grey eyes lifted from an untouched cup of coffee, and for a moment, they simply looked at each other. He wasn't what she'd expected. No expensive suit, no flashy watch. Just a man in his late 30s wearing a simple button-down shirt with sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms marked by honest work. His dark hair showed traces of silver at the temples, and his beard looked like he'd forgotten to shave for a few days. There was something deliberately unremarkable about his appearance, as if he'd chosen invisibility over impression. "Miss Ellis." His voice carried no trace of California casualness, just measured formality. "Mr. Moore." She slid into the booth across from him, noting how his fingers wrapped around the coffee mug without lifting it, like he needed something to hold on to. The waitress appeared, an older woman with kind eyes and sensible shoes. "What can I get you, honey?" "Just coffee, please." Yanka's Alabama accent emerged slightly thicker than usual, the way it always did when she felt uncertain. They sat in silence until the coffee arrived. Steam rose between them like a barrier neither seemed ready to cross. The lawyer explained the arrangement, Cristiano said finally, his eyes focused somewhere just past her shoulder. "But I want to make sure you understand what you're agreeing to." Yanka straightened. She'd had this conversation with herself 100 times during the 3-day bus ride. 9 months. Your baby, $50,000. Her voice stayed steady. Professional. "I understand perfectly." Something flickered across his face, surprise maybe, or disappointment. "It's not that simple." "It is for me." She took a sip of coffee, grateful for something to do with her hands. "I've done my research, Mr. Moore. I know the risks, the legal aspects, the medical requirements. This isn't my first rodeo with difficult decisions." He leaned back slightly, studying her with those unsettling grey eyes. "Why?" The question hung between them, more personal than anything they'd discussed through lawyers and paperwork. Yanka felt the familiar urge to deflect, to give him the sanitized version she'd prepared. Instead, she found herself being honest. "Because I'm tired of just surviving." The words came out quieter than she'd intended. "And because sometimes helping someone else get what they want is the only way to get what you need." Cristiano's hand moved to his jaw, fingers tracing the line of his beard, a gesture that seemed unconscious, vulnerable. "There's something else," he said, and the tone of his voice made her pulse quicken. "Something the lawyers didn't tell you." And in that moment, Yanka realized this arrangement was about to become far more complicated than any contract could contain. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, ready to snap at the slightest touch. Yanka's coffee cup trembled almost imperceptibly in her hands as she waited for Cristiano to continue. The diner's afternoon crowd buzzed around them, truckers ordering pie, a young mother wiping her toddler's face, an elderly couple sharing a basket of fries, but their corner booth felt isolated from the world. "The pregnancy will be high risk," Cristiano said finally, his grey eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her want to look away. "Not because of anything wrong with you, but because of my genetic history. My son—" He paused, his jaw working silently before he found the words. "My son was born with complications that made his first months difficult." Yanka set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. "What kind of complications?" "Heart defects, respiratory issues. He spent more time in the NICU than at home." Cristiano's voice remained steady, but she noticed how his knuckles whitened as he gripped his mug. "The doctors said it was genetic, rare, but possible to pass on." The waitress refilled their cups without being asked, her practiced movements a welcome distraction from the weight settling between them. Yanka watched the steam rise from her fresh coffee, buying herself time to process what she'd just heard. "So you're telling me," she said slowly, "that I could be carrying a baby who might not make it, or who might be perfectly healthy?" Cristiano leaned forward slightly, and for the first time since she'd sat down, his composure cracked just enough to reveal something raw underneath. "The chances are about 30% that there could be issues. 70% that everything would be normal." Yanka felt that familiar flutter in her chest, the same feeling she'd had at 19 when the police officer told her about her parents' accident, or at 23 when her last landlord gave her 3 days to pack, the feeling of the ground shifting beneath her feet. "And you didn't think to mention this before I traveled 2,000 miles. I wanted to tell you in person." His voice dropped lower, more private. "This isn't just a business transaction for me, Miss Ellis. If something goes wrong—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Yanka could hear the ending in the silence that followed. She studied his face, the lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, the careful way he held himself as if bracing for impact. "You lost them," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Cristiano's hand moved to his jaw again, that unconscious gesture she was beginning to recognize. "I had a car accident when my son was 2. My wife was driving to pick up his medication." The words came out measured, like he'd practiced saying them without falling apart. They were my whole world. The confession hung between them, heavy and honest. Yanka understood now why he'd sought out this arrangement, why he was willing to pay $50,000 to a stranger. It wasn't about wanting a child, it was about needing to fill a void that had swallowed everything else. She thought about the bus ticket in her backpack, about the $300 left in her worn wallet, about the endless succession of small towns and temporary jobs that had defined her adult life. She thought about her parents, gone 8 years now, and how desperately she'd wanted to build something permanent from the ashes of her loss. 70% odds, she repeated, more to herself than to him. "I understand if you want to walk away." Cristiano reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. "I brought enough cash to cover your bus fare back, plus extra for your time." Yanka stared at the envelope, then at his face. In his grey eyes she saw something she recognized, the particular kind of hope that came after too much grief, fragile and fierce at the same time. She made her decision before she could second-guess herself. "I'll need to meet the doctor first. I want to understand exactly what we're dealing with." She pushed the envelope back across the table. "And I'll need everything in writing, every detail, every risk, every contingency." Something shifted in Cristiano's expression, surprise, maybe, or relief. "Dr. Santos is the best high-risk specialist in Northern California," he said. "She handled my wife's pregnancy. She'll tell you everything you need to know." Yanka nodded, feeling the familiar sensation of stepping off a cliff into uncertain air. But this time, for the first time in years, she wasn't jumping alone. Outside the diner window, the California sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of promise and warning, and neither of them knew that this conversation had just set in motion something that would change both their lives forever. Dr. Elena Maria Santos had the kind of hands that made patients feel safe before she even spoke a word. Yanka noticed them first, steady, graceful fingers that moved with practiced confidence as she flipped through the medical charts. The doctor's office smelled of lavender and antiseptic, a combination that somehow managed to be both clinical and comforting. Diplomas lined the walls alongside family photos, showing a woman who clearly understood the value of both professional excellence and personal warmth. "Please, sit." Dr. Santos gestured to the chairs across from her mahogany desk, her voice carrying the slight musical accent of her Mexican heritage. At 44, she wore her authority lightly, dressed in earth-toned blouses that softened the sterile environment of the medical center. Yanka settled into the chair, hyper-aware of Cristiano's presence beside her. He sat with the same controlled posture she'd observed at the diner, but she caught him glancing at her when he thought she wasn't looking, quick, assessing glances that felt less like scrutiny and more like concern. "Mr. Moore has explained the situation," Dr. Santos began, her dark eyes moving between them with the kind of perceptive attention that missed nothing. "But I want to hear from you, Yanka. What questions do you have?" The use of her first name felt deliberately intimate, a small bridge across the professional distance. Yanka pulled gently at one of her braids, gathering her thoughts. "I need to know what high risk really means. Not the medical terminology, the truth about what I might be facing." Dr. Santos leaned back in her chair, a gesture that somehow made the room feel less formal. "I appreciate directness. It makes my job easier." She opened the top file on her desk. "Cristiano's genetic history indicates a 30% chance of cardiac and respiratory complications. If they occur, they typically manifest in the second trimester. And if they do manifest," Yanka's voice stayed steady, but she felt Cristiano tense beside her. "Bed rest, frequent monitoring, possible hospitalization for the final months." "Doctor." Santos's tone remained matter-of-fact, but her eyes carried genuine warmth. "The baby would likely be born premature and require extended NICU care, but Yanka..." She leaned forward slightly. 70% of pregnancies with this genetic marker result in completely healthy babies." Yanka absorbed this information, filing away each detail. "What about me? What are the risks to my health? Higher blood pressure? Increased chance of gestational diabetes? Possible complications during delivery? All manageable with proper care." Dr. Santos's fingers drummed once against the desk. "But there's something else we need to discuss." The room seemed to hold its breath. "If complications do arise, if this becomes a high-maintenance pregnancy requiring extended bed rest and hospitalization, you'll need someone to advocate for you. Someone who understands your medical history, your preferences, your fears." She looked directly at Cristiano. "The traditional surrogacy arrangement assumes distance between parties. This situation might require closeness." Yanka felt heat rise in her cheeks. "What kind of closeness?" "Living arrangements that allow for immediate medical response. 24-hour accessibility to both you and emergency care. In my experience with similar cases..." "Doctor," Santos paused, choosing her words carefully. "The most successful outcomes happen when the support system is consistent and present." Cristiano cleared his throat. "I have a guest house on my property. It's private, comfortable, close enough for medical emergencies, far enough for personal space." The offer hung in the air like a question neither of them had expected to face so soon. Yanka imagined herself in some remote guest house, dependent on a man she'd known for exactly one day, carrying a child who might or might not survive. "I need time to think," she said finally. "Of course." Dr. Santos reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a business card. "But Yanka, I want you to know something. I've been handling high-risk pregnancies for 15 years. I've seen arrangements like this work beautifully when both parties are committed to the process, and I've seen them fail when people try to maintain too much distance." She stood up, signaling the end of the consultation. "The choice is yours, but if you decide to move forward, we'll need to begin prenatal vitamins and monitoring within the week." Outside the medical center, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot. Yanka and Cristiano walked to his truck, an older Ford F-150 that looked well-maintained but unpretentious, exactly what she was beginning to expect from him. "The guest house," she said, as they reached the vehicle. "What's it like?" Cristiano's hand paused on the door handle. "One bedroom, small kitchen, bathroom with a garden tub, windows facing the vineyard. It's quiet." After 8 years of bus stations, highway motels and shared apartments with strangers, quiet sounded like a foreign concept. "Can I see it?" The words came out before she could stop them. He nodded, and something in his expression shifted. A wall coming down, or maybe a door opening just a crack. As they drove toward his property, Yanka stared out the window at the rolling hills of Napa Valley and wondered if she was about to make the smartest decision of her life, or the most dangerous one she'd ever risked. The vineyard stretched out like a green ocean under the golden hour light, and Yanka felt something inside her chest loosen for the first time in months. Cristiano's property was nothing like she'd imagined. No ostentatious mansion or manicured gardens screaming wealth. Instead, she saw weathered wooden fences, gravel pathways worn smooth by years of use, and a main house that looked like it had grown organically from the landscape itself. The guest house sat about 50 yards away, a small, cottage-like structure with white-painted wood siding and a wraparound porch that begged for a rocking chair. "It's not much," Cristiano said, as he cut the truck's engine, but his voice carried a note of pride he was trying to hide. Yanka stepped out of the cab, her sneakers crunching on the gravel. The air smelled different here, clean with hints of earth and growing things that reminded her vaguely of her grandmother's backyard in Montgomery, a place where she'd felt safe once upon a time. "It's perfect," she said, and meant it. The guest house key turned easily in the lock, and the front door opened to reveal exactly what Cristiano had promised. One bedroom, small kitchen, bathroom with a garden tub. But he'd undersold the charm. Hardwood floors worn to a warm honey color, windows that let in streams of late afternoon light, and a kitchen table just big enough for two people who might want to share a quiet meal. "The previous owners built it for their daughter when she got married," Cristiano explained, lingering in the doorway, as if uncertain whether he should follow her inside. She wanted to stay close to family, but have her own space. Yanka ran her fingers along the kitchen counter. Real wood, not laminate. In the bedroom, she found a queen-sized bed with a quilt that looked handmade and windows that framed the vineyard like living paintings. "How long since anyone lived here?" she asked. 3 years. He paused. "Since before my wife and son died." The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. This wasn't just a guest house, it was a place where he'd once imagined hosting family, friends, celebrations. Now it sat empty, another casualty of his grief. Yanka turned to face him. "Why are you doing this?" "Really?" Cristiano looked out the bedroom window toward the vineyard, his jaw working silently before he answered, "Because I'm tired of everything here being about loss." His voice came out rougher than usual. "I want something to grow again." The honesty in his words hit her unexpectedly hard. She thought about the bus ticket in her backpack, about the motel room she'd paid for in town, about the countless temporary places she'd called home over the past 8 years. "I have conditions," she said finally. "Name them. I keep my own schedule, my own routines. If I want to take the bus to town for groceries or just to think, I do it without checking in." She counted off on her fingers. "No hovering, no treating me like I'm made of glass, and no assumptions about what this arrangement means beyond the contract." Cristiano nodded. "Anything else? If this gets complicated, if you start looking at me like I'm her replacement, or if I start feeling like a prisoner in paradise, we call it off. No questions, no guilt trips." "Fair enough." He pulled a set of keys from his pocket and held them out. "House key, spare truck key in case of emergencies, and—" He hesitated. "The main house key, just in case." Their fingers brushed as she took the keys, and for a moment neither of them moved. The touch was brief, accidental, but it sent a jolt of awareness through her that had nothing to do with their business arrangement. "I'll need a few days to think it over," she said, stepping back. "Of course." But something in his expression suggested he already knew what her answer would be. As the sun began to set, they stood on the guest house porch, the vineyard spread out before them like a promise. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and the sound carried across the fields with rural ease. "What's that?" Yanka pointed to a small building near the main house. "Old wine cellar. I converted it into a workshop." Cristiano's hands found his pockets. "I restore furniture in my spare time. Keeps my hands busy." She could picture him there, sleeves rolled up, focused on bringing something broken back to life. The image felt unexpectedly intimate, like she was glimpsing something private. "I should get back to town," she said, though something in her was reluctant to leave. "I'll drive you." "I can walk. It's only a couple miles." "Not in the dark." His tone brooked no argument. "Besides, I need to pick up groceries anyway." As they drove back toward town, the silence between them felt different, less guarded, more thoughtful. When they reached the motel, Cristiano parked but didn't turn off the engine. "Yanka," he said as she reached for the door handle. She turned back to him. "Whatever you decide, I want you to know, this isn't about replacing what I lost. It's about building something new." She studied his face in the dashboard light, seeing something there she hadn't noticed before. Vulnerability wrapped in determination. "I'll call you tomorrow," she said. But as she walked toward her motel room, Yanka already knew that tomorrow would bring a decision that would change everything. Because for the first time in 8 years, she'd found a place that felt like it might become home. 3 days later, Yanka stood in the guest house doorway with everything she owned fitting into 2 duffel bags and a worn backpack. It wasn't much. Clothes that had survived countless laundromats, a few books with dog-eared pages, the small sewing kit her mother had given her, and a mason jar filled with buttons she'd collected from every city she'd passed through. 8 years of nomadic life distilled into what she could carry. "That's it?" Cristiano asked, setting down the bags he'd insisted on carrying from his truck. "I travel light." She tried to keep her voice casual, but something about the way he looked at her meager possessions made her feel exposed. Less to lose that way. He nodded slowly, understanding flickering in his grey eyes. "I put some basics in the kitchen. Coffee, bread, eggs. There's a grocery store in town, but if you need anything specific, I can take care of myself." The words came out sharper than she'd intended, a defensive reflex honed by years of independence. "I know you can." His response was gentle, without judgment. "I just meant, you don't have to." The distinction hit her unexpectedly. There was a difference between being able to take care of yourself and having to do it alone. She wasn't sure she remembered how to navigate that difference. "Dr. Santos wants to see me next week," she said, changing the subject. "Start the monitoring. I'll drive you. I can." "Yanka," he said her name quietly, and something in his tone made her look at him. "Let me help. It's what I'm here for." She wanted to argue, to maintain the walls that had kept her safe for so long. Instead, she found herself nodding. After Cristiano left, she unpacked in silence, placing her few belongings in drawers that felt cavernous compared to the motel rooms and shared spaces she was used to. The closet could hold 10 times her wardrobe. The bathroom had counter space for toiletries she didn't own. That evening, as she sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and one of her books, a soft knock interrupted the quiet. Through the window, she could see Cristiano on the porch, holding a plate covered with a kitchen towel. "I made too much dinner," he said when she opened the door. "Thought you might be hungry." The plate held perfectly grilled chicken, roasted vegetables that looked like they'd come from his own garden, and rice with herbs she couldn't identify. It smelled like comfort, like the kind of meal someone makes when they actually care about nourishment, rather than just filling an empty stomach. "You didn't have to." "I know." He handed her the plate, their fingers brushing again. This time, neither of them pulled away immediately. "But I wanted to." After he left, Yanka ate slowly, savoring each bite. The vegetables were sweet and tender, the chicken seasoned with something that reminded her of her grandmother's Sunday dinners. When she finished, she found herself staring at the empty plate, wondering when was the last time someone had cooked for her just because they wanted to take care of her. The next morning, she woke to find a thermos of coffee on the porch steps, still warm, with a note, "In case you like it stronger than what's in the kitchen." The coffee was perfect, dark and rich, exactly how she preferred it. He'd been paying attention during their brief conversations, filing away details she hadn't even realized she'd shared. That afternoon, she ventured to the main house to return the dinner plate. Through the kitchen window, she could see Cristiano at the stove, sleeves rolled up, moving with the easy confidence of someone who actually enjoyed cooking. He looked different here, less guarded, more himself. "Thank you for dinner," she said when he answered her knock. "There's leftover lasagna if you want some." He gestured toward the kitchen. "I'm not good at cooking for one person anymore." The admission was quietly devastating. She could picture him in this kitchen with his wife, probably laughing while they prepared meals together, maybe with their son in a high chair making a mess with his food. Now he cooked elaborate meals for no one, muscle memory of a life that no longer existed. "I could help," she found herself saying. "With the cooking, I mean, if you want." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe gratitude. "You don't have to." "I know," she echoed his words from the night before, "but I want to." That evening, they cooked together in comfortable silence. Yanka chopped vegetables while Cristiano seasoned the meat, their movements gradually synchronizing as they shared the small kitchen space. When her hand reached for the salt at the same time as his, when he stepped behind her to reach the upper cabinet, when she passed him ingredients without being asked, each small interaction felt like a dance they were learning together. "You're good at this," he said, watching her julienne carrots with practiced precision. "My grandmother taught me. Said a woman should know how to feed herself and the people she loves." The words slipped out before she could catch them, carrying more weight than she'd intended. "She sounds wise." She was. Yanka focused on the carrots, not trusting herself to look at him. "She died when I was 16. Cancer. I'm sorry." The simple words carried genuine sympathy, not the empty platitudes she was used to hearing. He understood loss, understood the way it carved holes in your life that never quite filled in. As they sat down to eat, Yanka realized This was the first time in years she'd shared a meal that felt like more than just consuming calories. The food tasted better when eaten across from someone who noticed whether you preferred your vegetables crisp or tender, who refilled your water glass without being asked, who seemed genuinely interested in the small stories you found yourself telling between bites. "This is nice," she said softly, then immediately regretted the admission. "It is," Cristiano agreed, his voice equally quiet. Outside the kitchen window, the vineyard stretched into darkness, and somewhere in the distance she could hear the evening sounds of the countryside, crickets, the rustle of wind through grapevines, the settled breathing of land at rest. For the first time since her parents died, Janka felt something that might have been peace, but peace, she'd learned, was the most dangerous emotion of all, because it made you want to stay. 2 weeks into the pregnancy, Janka woke up at 3 in the morning with her heart racing and her hands trembling. The nausea had started gradually, a queasy feeling that crept in during the afternoon, making her push away half-finished meals. But this was different. This felt like her body was staging a revolution, and she was losing the war. She stumbled to the bathroom, gripping the cool porcelain of the sink, as waves of dizziness washed over her. In the mirror, her reflection looked pale against her dark skin, and the braids she'd been too tired to properly wrap the night before fell in loose tendrils around her face. "Come on," she whispered to herself, the Alabama accent thicker in her exhaustion. "You've handled worse than this." But as another wave of nausea hit, she wasn't so sure. A soft knock on the guest house door made her freeze. Through the window, she could see Cristiano's silhouette on the porch, and she realized she'd left the bathroom light on, a beacon in the pre-dawn darkness that had probably woken him. "Janka, are you okay?" She wanted to call out that she was fine, that he should go back to bed, that she didn't need anyone hovering over her. Instead, she found herself opening the door, grateful for the cool night air on her clammy skin. "I'm fine," she said automatically, but the words came out shaky. Cristiano took one look at her and stepped inside without asking permission. "You're not fine. When did this start?" "Few days ago." She sank into one of the kitchen chairs, suddenly too tired to maintain her usual walls. "It's just morning sickness, normal pregnancy stuff." "At 3 in the morning?" She managed a weak smile. "The baby doesn't know how to tell time yet." But Cristiano didn't smile back. He was studying her with the same intense focus she'd seen in Dr. Santos's office, cataloguing details with the precision of someone who'd learned to watch for warning signs. "Have you been eating?" he asked. "Some." The truth was, everything had started tasting wrong. Even her morning coffee, the one bright spot in her daily routine, now made her stomach revolt. Without a word, Cristiano moved to her kitchen, opening cabinets with the easy familiarity of someone who'd stocked them himself. He pulled out crackers, ginger tea, and honey, moving with quiet efficiency as he prepared something that smelled soothing rather than overwhelming. "My wife had terrible morning sickness," he said, his back to her as he worked. "Dr. Santos said ginger tea and small, frequent meals. Nothing too strong, nothing too sweet." Janka watched his hands as he prepared the tea. Steady, careful, practiced. "Did it help?" "Sometimes." He turned to face her, and for a moment, the careful distance he usually maintained slipped away. She used to joke that the baby was already making demands like a typical Moor. The past tense hung between them like a bridge neither of them had expected to cross. Janka found herself wanting to ask more about his wife, about the pregnancy, about what it felt like to lose everything you'd built your life around. Instead, she accepted the mug of tea he offered, inhaling the gentle steam. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You don't have to thank me for taking care of you." The words came out more intense than he'd probably intended, and she saw him catch himself, stepping back both physically and emotionally. "I mean, it's part of the arrangement." But they both knew it wasn't just about the arrangement anymore. The tea helped, warm and settling in her stomach. As the nausea receded, Janka became aware of other things, how Cristiano had thrown on jeans and a t-shirt over what were obviously sleep clothes, how his hair stuck up on one side, how he kept glancing at her with barely concealed worry. "You didn't have to get up," she said. "I could have handled this alone." "I know you could have." He sat down across from her at the small table. "But you don't have to anymore." There was that phrase again. The distinction between could and had to. It was becoming a theme between them. This careful negotiation of independence and care. "The light woke you up?" "No." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "I don't sleep much anyway. I was reading in the kitchen when I saw your light come on." "Insomnia." Another casualty of grief, she supposed. She imagined him sitting alone in his kitchen at 3 in the morning, probably drinking coffee that was too strong and reading books that couldn't quite distract him from the quiet of a house meant for a family. "What do you read?" she asked. The question seemed to surprise him. Mostly non-fiction, farming journals, winemaking techniques, sometimes biography. He paused. "What about you?" "Fiction, usually. Romance novels, mostly." She felt heat rise in her cheeks at the admission. People always act like they're trash, but they're not. They're about hope, about believing that two broken people can fix each other. Something flickered across his face. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. "I don't think they're trash," he said quietly. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten at the edges, dawn creeping across the vineyard in shades of purple and gold. Janka realized they'd been sitting here for nearly an hour, talking in the soft voices of people who'd found themselves unexpectedly comfortable with each other. "I should let you get some sleep," Cristiano said, standing. "Will you?" she asked. "Sleep, I mean." He paused at the door, one hand on the frame. "Probably not. But that's not your problem to solve." "Maybe not," she said. "But I'm awake too if you want company." The offer hung between them, more intimate than either of them had intended. Cristiano looked at her for a long moment, and she could see him weighing the wisdom of accepting against the loneliness of declining. "I make good coffee," he said finally. "Even if you can't drink it right now. I'll stick with the tea, but I'd like the company." As they walked together toward the main house in the early morning light, Janka realized something had shifted between them. The careful boundaries they'd established were beginning to blur, replaced by something more honest and infinitely more dangerous. Because caring for someone, really caring, was the first step toward loving them, and love had never been part of their contract. "Your blood pressure is elevated, and you've lost 3 pounds since last week." Dr. Santos's words hung in the examination room like a diagnosis neither Janka nor Cristiano wanted to hear. The ultrasound machine hummed softly in the corner, and Janka could still feel the cool gel on her belly from the scan that had shown their baby, healthy, active, and completely unaware of the complications brewing around it. "What does that mean?" Janka asked, adjusting the paper gown that never seemed to cover enough. "It means we need to take this more seriously." Dr. Santos pulled her chair closer, her earth-toned cardigan a calming presence in the sterile room. The nausea, the weight loss, the elevated blood pressure, these aren't just normal pregnancy symptoms. Your body is struggling with the hormonal changes. Cristiano leaned forward in his chair, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "What can we do?" "Bed rest. Modified, not complete, yet. But I want Janka to limit her activities, stay hydrated, and eat small meals every 2 hours whether she feels like it or not." Dr. Santos's dark eyes moved between them with the perceptive attention Janka was beginning to recognize. "She'll need someone to monitor her, make sure she's following the restrictions." "I can take care of myself," Janka said automatically, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew they sounded hollow. The past few days had been a struggle, dizziness when she stood too quickly, exhaustion that seemed to seep into her bones, nausea that made even water taste wrong. "I know you can," Dr. Santos said gently. "Joyce, but right now, taking care of yourself means accepting help. This isn't about weakness, Janka. This is about giving your baby the best chance." The word baby still felt strange on her tongue, still carried the clinical distance of fetus or pregnancy. But when Dr. Santos said it with warmth and certainty, it became something real, something that deserved protection. "What about work?" Janka asked. She'd been doing some freelance bookkeeping online, small jobs that helped her feel productive and independent. "Light computer work is fine, but no stress, no deadlines that keep you up at night." Dr. Santos made notes in her chart. "And I want to see you weekly now instead of bi-weekly." Outside the medical center, Cristiano was unusually quiet as they walked to his truck. The late morning sun felt too bright, too cheerful for the weight of what they'd just heard. "You're worried," Janka said as they drove through downtown Napa. "Aren't you?" She was, but admitting it felt like giving up some essential part of herself, the part that had survived 8 years of uncertainty by refusing to depend on anyone else's strength. "I'll be fine," she said. "I just need to adjust my routine." Cristiano pulled into a pharmacy parking lot and turned off the engine. "Janka, look at me." When she met his grey eyes, she saw something there that made her chest tighten. Not pity, but genuine concern, mixed with something deeper, more personal. "You don't have to pretend this isn't scary," he said quietly. "I'm scared too." The admission hit her unexpectedly hard. She'd been so focused on maintaining her own walls that she hadn't considered how this might be affecting him. Watching another pregnancy carry the same risks that had once threatened his wife and child. "I keep thinking about what Dr. Santos said," she found herself saying, "about accepting help. I don't know how to do that anymore. Maybe that's something we can figure out together." The word "together" hung between them, carrying more weight than a simple arrangement between strangers. They sat in the parking lot, watching people go about their ordinary lives, and Janka realized that somewhere in the past month, this had stopped being ordinary for either of them. That afternoon, Cristiano appeared at the guest house with bags of groceries and a determined expression. "What's all this?" Janka asked, watching him unload items onto her kitchen counter. "Dr. Santos gave me a list." He held up a piece of paper covered in his careful handwriting. "Try foods that might help with the nausea, things that are easy to digest, supplements you need to take." She watched him organize everything with methodical precision, crackers in one cabinet, herbal teas in another, fruits and vegetables that looked like they'd been chosen with scientific care. "You don't have to—" "Janka." He turned to face her, and she saw that familiar gesture as his hand moved to his jaw. "Let me do this. Please." There was something in his voice, not quite desperation, but close to it. She realized this wasn't just about taking care of her. This was about him needing to feel useful, needed, protective. This was about him trying to save someone he couldn't save before. "Okay," she said quietly. Relief flickered across his face. "I can cook for both of us, bring meals over, or you could eat at the main house. Whatever feels comfortable." "The main house," she heard herself say. "If that's okay, it feels less like charity that way." Something warm crossed his expression. "It's not charity, it's—" He paused, searching for the right word. "It's taking care of family." The word family settled between them like a question neither of them was ready to answer. But that evening, as Janka sat at Cristiano's kitchen table eating soup that tasted like comfort and watching him move around the kitchen with quiet efficiency, it didn't feel like pretending. It felt like something she'd been missing without knowing it. "The baby moved today," she said suddenly, her hand moving unconsciously to her still flat stomach. "During the ultrasound, Dr. Santos said it was a good sign." Cristiano paused in his dishwashing, his shoulders tensing slightly. Could you feel it?" "Not yet, but I could see it on the screen. Just a little flutter." She looked down at her hands, made it seem more real somehow. When he turned to face her, his eyes held a mixture of joy and pain that made her heart ache for him. "That's good," he said softly. That's really good." Later, as she walked back to the guest house under a sky full of stars, Janka realized that for the first time since her parents died, she wasn't just surviving. She was hoping, and hope, she was beginning to understand, was the most dangerous thing of all. The nightmares always came at 2:30 in the morning. Janka had been living at the guest house for 6 weeks now, and she'd learned to recognize the sounds from the main house. The sudden silence, where there should have been the gentle rhythm of sleep, followed by footsteps pacing across hardwood floors. Then the soft closing of a door as Cristiano stepped onto his porch. Tonight, as she lay in bed feeling the baby's first tentative movements like butterfly wings against her ribs, she heard it again, the restless walking, the weight of grief moving through rooms that had once held laughter. She should stay in bed, mind her own business, respect the boundaries they'd carefully maintained, even as those boundaries grew thinner each day. Instead, she found herself pulling on her robe and walking across the dewy grass toward the main house. Cristiano sat on his porch steps, elbows on his knees, staring out at the vineyard. He'd thrown on jeans and a t-shirt, but his feet were bare, and his hair stuck up on one side like he'd been running his hands through it. In the moonlight, he looked younger and more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. "You're supposed to be resting," he said without looking up, as if he'd sensed her approach. "So are you." She settled beside him on the step, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body, but not quite touching. "Is I a bad dream?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Car accident. Always the same one. I see it happening, but I can't stop it." Janka pulled her robe tighter around herself, feeling the night air carry the scent of grapevines and earth. "Do you want to talk about it?" "Not particularly," but he didn't get up and go inside, didn't shut down the conversation the way she expected. "What about you? Why are you awake?" "Baby's moving more at night. It's strange, like having a secret only I know about." She placed her hand on her stomach, where a gentle flutter responded to her touch. "Sometimes I forget this is temporary, that in a few months I'll hand this baby over and go back to my regular life. Will you? The question came out quiet, almost hesitant. That's the arrangement. I know what the arrangement says. Cristiano turned to look at her, and in the moonlight, his grey eyes seemed almost silver. But what do you want? The question hung between them like a bridge she wasn't sure she was brave enough to cross. What did she want? For 8 years, wanting had been a luxury she couldn't afford. Wanting meant hoping, and hoping meant disappointment, and disappointment meant the kind of pain that could knock you flat for months. I don't know, she said honestly. I've spent so long not letting myself want things that I've forgotten how. I remember what that's like. His voice carried the weight of experience. After the accident, I stopped wanting anything except for the pain to stop. It was safer that way. What changed? He looked out at the vineyard where moonlight painted the grapevines silver. You did. This did. He gestured vaguely toward her stomach. Suddenly, I was invested in something again, and it terrified me. The admission hit her like a physical blow, not because it was unexpected, but because it voiced something she'd been feeling but couldn't name. This growing sense that what was happening between them was bigger than a business arrangement, more complicated than simple proximity. Cristiano, she started, then stopped, not sure how to finish. I know, he said quietly. I know this wasn't supposed to happen. I know we agreed to keep things professional, but somewhere along the way, professional became personal, and personal became dangerous, she finished. Yeah. They sat in silence, the weight of unspoken feelings settling around them like fog. In the distance, an owl called, and somewhere in the vineyard, small creatures rustled through the leaves, carrying on with their lives, while 2 humans tried to figure out how theirs had become so tangled together. I think about you all the time, Cristiano said suddenly, the words rushing out like he'd been holding them back for weeks. How you pull on your braids when you're thinking, how you hum while you cook, how you get that line between your eyebrows when you're trying not to let me see that you need help. Janka felt heat rise in her cheeks. Cristiano, I think about what it would be like if this were real, if you were staying because you wanted to, not because Dr. Santos said you had to. If this baby were ours, not just mine. The word ours hung in the air between them, carrying all the weight of possibilities they'd both been trying not to acknowledge. But it's not real, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, and wanting it to be real is just going to hurt both of us. I know that. He turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his expression made her breath catch. But I can't seem to stop myself from wanting it anyway. Without thinking, she reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers in a gesture that felt both natural and earth-shattering. His skin was warm, calloused from work, and she could feel his pulse beating against her thumb. I'm scared, she admitted. I've been alone for so long that I don't know how to be part of something. And this baby, what happens when the baby comes? What happens to us? I don't know. He squeezed her hand gently. But maybe we don't have to figure it all out tonight. Maybe not, she agreed. They sat holding hands in the moonlight, 2 people who'd found each other in the space between grief and hope, contract and connection. The baby moved again, a stronger flutter this time, and Janka gasped softly. What? Cristiano asked, concern immediately replacing the softness in his voice. The baby, it's here. She guided his free hand to her stomach, pressing his palm against the spot where she'd felt the movement. They waited, barely breathing, and then it happened again. A gentle push against his hand, like the baby was saying hello. Cristiano's eyes filled with tears. He tried to blink away. That's incredible. The first time you felt it move, Janka said softly. The first time anyone has, he corrected. You're the only one who's been there for all of this. The weight of that truth settled between them. She was the one who'd been there for the morning sickness, the doctor's appointments, the midnight worries. She was the one carrying this piece of his heart, literally and figuratively. I should go back to bed, she said, but neither of them moved, probably. But his hand stayed on her stomach, and hers stayed in his. Now this is going to complicate everything, she whispered. Everything's already complicated, he said, but maybe that's not such a bad thing. As they finally stood to go their separate ways, Janka realized that tonight had changed something fundamental between them. They'd crossed a line they couldn't uncross, acknowledged feelings they couldn't take back, and as she walked back to the guest house with the memory of his hand on her stomach and the warmth of his confession still echoing in her ears, she knew that whatever happened next, she was no longer just carrying his baby, she was carrying his heart. And somehow he'd ended up with hers. The contractions started at 4 in the morning, sharp and unmistakable, 12 weeks before they were supposed to. Yanka woke with a gasp that turned into a cry of pain, her hands instinctively moving to her 28-week belly as her body cramped with frightening intensity. This wasn't the gentle Braxton Hicks contractions Dr. Santos had warned her about. This was something else entirely. "No, no, no," she whispered to the empty guest house, panic rising in her throat as another contraction gripped her. "Not yet. Please, not yet." Through the haze of pain and fear, she managed to reach for her phone, fingers shaking as she scrolled to Cristiano's number. The phone rang once before his voice answered, instantly alert despite the early hour. "Yanka, what's wrong?" "Something's happening," she managed between contractions. "The baby, I think—" She didn't need to finish. Through the window, she could see lights flicking on in the main house, and within minutes, Cristiano was at her door, still pulling on a shirt over his jeans, his hair disheveled, but his eyes sharp with focus. "How far apart?" he asked, moving to her side with the calm efficiency of someone who'd been through this before. "Every 3 minutes," she gasped. "Cristiano, it's too early. The baby can't come now. We're going to the hospital." His voice stayed steady, but she could see the fear in his grey eyes, the memory of another emergency that had ended in loss. "Can you walk?" The drive to the hospital passed in a blur of pain and sirens. Cristiano had called 911, and the paramedics met them halfway, transferring Yanka to the ambulance while he followed behind. She kept her eyes fixed on his truck in the side mirror, drawing strength from his presence even as terror threatened to overwhelm her. "We need to stop this," she heard Dr. Santos saying as they wheeled her into the emergency room. "Get her on magnesium sulfate, start an IV, and call the NICU team." The next hours passed in a haze of medical procedures and mounting fear. Yanka found herself in a hospital bed, connected to monitors that beeped with the baby's heartbeat, strong but too fast, distressed by whatever was happening in her body. "The medication is helping," Dr. Santos explained, her usually calm demeanor showing cracks of concern. "We've slowed the contractions, but not stopped them completely. You're not dilating, which is good, but the baby is showing signs of stress." "What does that mean?" Cristiano asked from the chair beside her bed. He'd been there since they arrived, holding her hand through each contraction, his presence the only thing keeping her anchored to hope. "It means we wait, and we watch, very carefully." Dr. Santos checked the monitors again. "Yanka, you're going to be here for a while. Strict bed rest, constant monitoring. If the contractions stop and stay stopped for 48 hours, we can consider sending you home. But if they continue—" She didn't need to finish. If they continued, the baby would come too early, too small, too fragile, just like Cristiano's son had. "I want to stay," Cristiano said suddenly, his voice rough with emotion. "Not just during visiting hours. I want to be here." Dr. Santos looked between them with her perceptive eyes, seeing something that went deeper than their original arrangement. "Are you the father?" The question hung in the room like a challenge. Legally, biologically, yes, Cristiano was the father. But the way Dr. Santos asked it, the way she looked at them holding hands with Yanka's head on his shoulder, suggested she was asking about something more fundamental. "Yes," Cristiano said simply. "So then you can stay." As evening fell, Yanka lay in the hospital bed watching the monitors trace her baby's heartbeat in green lines across the screen. The contractions had slowed but not stopped, a constant reminder that everything she'd begun to hope for hung in the balance. "You should go home," she told Cristiano, though the thought of being alone made her chest tighten with panic. "Get some real sleep. I'm not leaving." His voice carried a finality that brooked no argument. "I already lost one family in a hospital. I'm not losing another." The word family hit her like a physical blow, not because it was unexpected, but because of how desperately she wanted it to be true. "Cristiano?" she started, but he shook his head. "No, let me say this. I know what our arrangement was supposed to be. I know you were supposed to carry this baby and then walk away, but that's not what this is anymore, and we both know it." He leaned forward, his grey eyes intense in the harsh hospital lighting. "I'm in love with you, Yanka. Not just grateful, not just attracted to you, but completely, terrifyingly in love with you." Tears she'd been holding back for hours finally spilled over. "You can't say that. Not now. Not like this. What if the baby—" "The baby is going to be fine," he said fiercely. "And when it is, when we get through this, I want you to know that I don't want you to leave. I want you to stay, not because of the baby, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. I don't know how to be someone's family. What if I mess it up? What if I run when things get hard? Then I'll come find you, he said simply. And I'll keep finding you until you believe that you're not alone anymore. The monitors around them continued their electronic symphony, but all Janka could hear was the sound of her own heart breaking open. Not with loss, but with the terrifying possibility of love. I love you too, she whispered, the words feeling both natural and revolutionary. I've been trying not to, but I do. I love you and I love this baby, and I'm scared that wanting something this much means I'm going to lose it. Cristiano moved from his chair to sit on the edge of her bed, careful not to disturb the wires and monitors. You're not going to lose us, he said, brushing tears from her cheeks with gentle fingers. We're going to get through this together. Promise me, she said, gripping his hand. Promise me that if something happens to the baby, it won't change this. That you won't look at me and see failure. I promise, he said without hesitation. And I need you to promise me something too. What? Promise me you'll stop running. Promise me you'll stay and fight for this, for us, even when it gets scary. Outside the hospital window, dawn was breaking over Napa Valley, painting the sky in shades of hope and promise. Somewhere in the distance, life was going on, people waking up, making coffee, starting their ordinary days. But here, in this room filled with monitors and medical equipment, and the weight of everything they'd finally admitted, nothing would ever be ordinary again. I promise, Janka whispered, and as Cristiano leaned down to kiss her forehead, as the baby's heartbeat continued its steady rhythm on the monitor, she realized that sometimes the most dangerous thing you could do was exactly what your heart needed most. Sometimes you had to stop running and start believing that you deserved to be caught. 6 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning that felt like any other but would change everything, Janka's water broke while she was folding baby clothes. She'd been on modified bed rest since the hospital scare, spending her days in the main house where Cristiano could keep an eye on her. The guest house had become storage for baby supplies, a crib they'd assembled together, tiny clothes in soft colors, blankets that smelled like hope and possibility. Cristiano, she called calmly from the living room, where she stood in a puddle of amniotic fluid, holding an impossibly small yellow onesie. It's time. He appeared in the doorway, dish towel still in his hands, and took in the scene with the practiced calm that had gotten them through 6 weeks of uncertainty. How do you feel? He asked, already reaching for the hospital bag they'd kept packed by the door. Ready? She said, and meant it. After weeks of fear and waiting, after midnight conversations about names and futures and what their family would look like, she was finally ready to meet the baby who'd brought them together. The drive to the hospital was different this time. No sirens, no panic, just the quiet anticipation of something long-awaited finally arriving. Janka's contractions were strong but manageable, and between them, she found herself studying Cristiano's profile as he drove. What are you thinking about? He asked, catching her watching him. How different everything is from that first day at the diner. She shifted in her seat as another contraction built. I thought I was just agreeing to carry a baby for 9 months, and instead you got stuck with me, he said with a small smile. I wouldn't call it stuck. She reached for his hand as they pulled into the hospital parking lot. I'd call it found. Doctor. Santos was waiting for them in the delivery room, her calm presence immediately soothing Janka's nerves. The next several hours passed in a blur of contractions and coaching, of Cristiano holding her hand and whispering encouragements, of the overwhelming intensity of bringing life into the world. I can see the head, Dr. Santos announced. One more push, Janka. With Cristiano's hand in hers and her own determination fueling her, Janka pushed with everything she had left, and then, suddenly, the room filled with the sound she'd been waiting 8 months to hear, a baby's first cry, strong and indignant and absolutely perfect. It's a girl, Dr. Santos said, her voice thick with emotion as she placed the baby on Janka's chest. A beautiful, healthy girl. Janka looked down at the tiny face scrunched against her chest, dark hair, skin still red from the effort of being born, eyes squeezed shut against the bright world she'd just entered. She was perfect in a way that made everything else fade away. She's so small, Cristiano whispered, his voice rough with tears. She's perfect, Janka corrected, running a gentle finger over the baby's impossibly soft cheek. Dr. Santos worked quietly around them, handling the medical necessities while allowing them this first precious moment as a family, because that's what they were now, Janka realized. Not a business arrangement, not a temporary situation, but a family born from grief and hope, and the kind of love that surprised you when you least expected it. What's her name? Dr. Santos asked softly. Yanka looked at Cristiano, seeing her own overwhelming emotion reflected in his grey eyes. They'd discussed names during the long weeks of bed rest, but somehow none of them had felt right until now. Hope, Cristiano said suddenly, the name coming out like a prayer. Her name is Hope. Hope Ellis Moore, Yanka added, including her own surname without thinking about it, making the baby theirs in a way that went beyond paperwork. Hope Ellis Moore, Dr. Santos repeated, making a note in her chart. That's a strong name for a strong little girl. Later, after Hope had been cleaned and measured and declared perfectly healthy, after the nurses had given them privacy and visiting hours had ended, Yanka and Cristiano sat together in the quiet hospital room, taking turns holding their daughter. I need to tell you something, Yanka said as she watched Cristiano cradle Hope with the careful reverence of someone who understood how precious life could be. He looked up, concern flickering across his face. The contract, she continued, I know what it says about after the birth, about me leaving. Cristiano went very still. Yanka, I'm not going anywhere, she said firmly. I know we'll need to figure out the legal stuff, make it official somehow, but I'm not walking away from this. From her. From you. Relief flooded his expression, followed by something that looked like pure joy. Are you sure? Because once you decide to stay, I'm not letting you change your mind. I'm sure. She reached for his free hand, intertwining their fingers in the gesture that had become natural to them. I spent 8 years running from everything that mattered, because I was afraid of getting hurt. But you know what I realized? What? Getting hurt is worth it if it means getting to love someone. And I love you, Cristiano Moore. I love you and I love our daughter, and I want to build something real with you. He leaned over to kiss her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, careful not to wake the baby sleeping peacefully in his arms. I love you too, he whispered against her lips. Both of you, more than I ever thought I could love anything again. Outside the hospital window, the sun was setting over Napa Valley, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Somewhere in the distance, life was going on as usual, but here in this room everything had changed. A baby had been born, a family had been created, and 2 people who'd thought they were too broken to love again had discovered that sometimes the best things grow from the cracks. What happens now? Yanka asked, looking down at Hope's sleeping face. Now we go home, Cristiano said simply. But we take our daughter home, and we figure out how to be a family. I like the sound of that, Yanka said, and as Hope stirred in her father's arms, making the soft sounds that newborns make when they're dreaming, Yanka thought about all the roads that had led her here, all the losses and fears and temporary homes that had somehow brought her to this moment, this man, this perfect little girl who would never doubt that she was wanted, loved, and home. Sometimes, she realized, the best destinations were the ones you never planned to reach, and sometimes the most beautiful love stories were the ones that began with a contract and ended with forever. 2 years later, the sound of bare feet running across hardwood floors woke Yanka before the sun did. She opened her eyes to find Hope standing beside the bed, her dark curls still messy from sleep, clutching the worn stuffed elephant that had become her constant companion. At 2 years old, Hope had inherited her father's grey eyes and her mother's stubborn independence, along with a smile that could melt the hardest heart. "Mama, up," Hope demanded, reaching chubby arms toward the bed. "It's still early, baby girl," Yanka whispered, but she was already lifting Hope onto the mattress, settling her between herself and Cristiano, who was just beginning to stir. "Tiny too early," Cristiano mumbled into his pillow, but his arm automatically came around both of them, pulling his girls closer. This had become their morning ritual, Hope climbing into bed before dawn, the 3 of them stealing a few more minutes of warmth and togetherness before the day demanded their attention. The bed that had once felt too big for one lonely man now perfectly fit a family. Through the bedroom window, Yanka could see the vineyard stretching toward the hills, the grapevines heavy with fruit ready for harvest. It was their 3rd harvest together, and she still felt a thrill of ownership when she looked out at the land that had become home in ways she'd never imagined possible. "Dada, coffee," Hope announced, patting Cristiano's cheek with the imperious authority of a toddler who knew she was adored. "Coffee for the princess coming up," Cristiano said, sitting up and running a hand through his hair. He looked different now. The lines around his eyes came from laughter instead of grief, and the careful distance he'd once maintained had been replaced by the easy affection of a man who'd learned to trust happiness again. Downstairs, the kitchen filled with the familiar sounds of their morning routine, Hope sat in her high chair, chattering to her stuffed elephant while Cristiano made coffee and Yanka prepared breakfast. The guest house had been converted into Cristiano's workshop years ago, its original purpose served and transformed into something new. Dr. Santos called yesterday, Yanka mentioned, as she flipped pancakes. Sanchi wants to schedule Hope's checkup for next week. Everything okay? Cristiano's voice carried the slight edge it always held when discussing anything medical, a father's protective instinct honed by experience. Everything's perfect, Yanka assured him. She just wants to see how tall our little giant has gotten. Hope had indeed grown tall for her age, with sturdy legs that carried her everywhere at a run and a vocabulary that impressed everyone who met her. She was healthy, curious and completely unaware that she'd been the catalyst for a love story that had saved 2 broken hearts. Speaking of Dr. Santos, Cristiano said, pouring coffee into 2 mugs and orange juice into Hope's sippy cup, she mentioned something interesting at the farmer's market last weekend. Oh, Yanka raised an eyebrow, recognizing his tone. She said she's been thinking about retiring, moving closer to her daughter in San Diego. He paused, studying Yanka's face, but she also said she'd been hoping to find the right couple to take over her practice, people who understand what it means to fight for family. Yanka nearly dropped the spatula. Cristiano, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? I'm saying that you've learned more about high-risk pregnancies in the past 2 years than most people learn in medical school. I'm saying you have a gift for making people feel safe when they're scared, and I'm saying that if you wanted to go back to school, become a nurse practitioner or midwife, he shrugged, we could make it work. The idea hit her like lightning, unexpected, illuminating, and suddenly making everything clear. She thought about all the women she'd met in Dr. Santos's waiting room over the years, all the couples facing the same fears she and Cristiano had once navigated. She thought about her own hands learning to comfort, her own voice learning to soothe, her own heart learning that sometimes the most meaningful work came from sharing your scars. You'd really support that, the schooling, the time away, all of it. Yanka. Cristiano set down his coffee mug and moved to stand behind her, his arms circling her waist as she leaned back against his chest. I'd support you in anything that makes you happy. We both would. Both, she asked, laughing as Hope clapped her hands and shouted, Mama School, as if she'd been following the entire conversation. She's already planning to be your first patient, Cristiano said, pressing a kiss to the side of Yanka's neck. Aren't you, huh, Hope? Mama help babies, Hope declared with the certainty of someone who'd clearly overheard more adult conversations than they'd realized. Later that morning, after breakfast and after Hope had been dressed and entertained, Yanka found herself walking through the vineyard alone. It was something she did when she needed to think, to process, to remember how far she'd traveled from the woman who'd stepped off a Greyhound bus 3 years ago with everything she owned in 2 duffel bags, the woman who'd been running from attachment, from hope, from the possibility of building something permanent, the woman who'd thought love was a luxury she couldn't afford. Now, as she walked between rows of grapevines heavy with fruit, she could hear Hope's laughter floating from the main house, where Cristiano was probably building elaborate block towers for her to knock down. She could smell the bread she'd put in the oven before her walk, could see the laundry hanging on the line, domestic details that had once felt foreign and now felt like home. Her phone buzzed with a text from her former client, a small business owner whose books she still handled remotely. Hope you and the family are well. Still the best accountant I've ever worked with, even part-time. She smiled, typing back, we're wonderful. Talk soon. Part-time work, full-time mother, potential student. Her life had become beautifully complicated in ways she'd never anticipated. And at the center of it all was a love that had grown slowly, carefully, from the space between grief and hope. There you are. She turned to find Cristiano walking toward her, Hope on his shoulders, both of them grinning like they'd just shared a secret. We come find Mama, Hope announced, as if this had been a great adventure rather than a walk across their own backyard. You found me, Yanka said, reaching up to tickle Hope's dangling feet, earning a squeal of delight. We were thinking, Cristiano said, settling Hope on the ground where she immediately began collecting interesting rocks. Maybe it's time for a family trip. Oh, where did you have in mind? Montgomery. The word hit her like a gentle blow, carrying all the weight of a past she'd spent years running from. Montgomery, Alabama, home of magnolia trees and childhood memories. Her parents' graves and her grandmother's house that probably still sat empty, waiting. I know it's been hard to think about going back, Cristiano continued quietly, but Hope should know where she comes from, both sides of her story. Janka felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming gratitude of being known so completely. He understood that her reluctance to visit Alabama wasn't about forgetting her past, but about being strong enough to face it. "You think I'm ready?" she asked. "I think you've been ready for a while. You just needed to realize it." Hope had wandered a few feet away, chattering to herself as she examined a particularly interesting grapevine. In the afternoon light, with her dark curls catching the sun and her small hands gentle with the leaves, she looked like a perfect blend of both her parents, Cristiano's thoughtfulness, Janka's determination, and something entirely her own. "Look, Mama," Hope called, holding up a cluster of grapes that had grown within her reach. "Pretty, very pretty, baby girl," Janka called back. "Just like you. We could visit your parents' graves," Cristiano said softly. "Let Hope meet her grandparents, even if it's just in story and memory." The idea of standing at her parents' graveside with her own family, of telling Hope about the grandparents who would have adored her, felt both healing and right. For years, she'd carried her grief alone. Now she could share it, let it become part of their family story, instead of a secret burden. "I'd like that," she said. "So I think it's time." That evening, after Hope had been bathed and read to and tucked into her crib with her elephant, Janka and Cristiano sat on their front porch, watching the sun set over the vineyard. The guest house stood empty now, but sometimes Janka still looked at it and remembered the woman who'd first walked through its door, scared, alone, convinced that attachment was dangerous. "Do you ever miss it?" Cristiano asked, following her gaze. "The freedom of not being tied down." Janka considered the question seriously. Did she miss the ability to pack everything she owned and disappear? Did she miss the simplicity of having no one to worry about but herself? "No," she said finally. "I don't miss being free. I was never free. I was just scared. There's a difference. And now? Now I'm brave enough to stay, brave enough to build something, brave enough to let people love me and to love them back, even though it's terrifying." Cristiano reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers in the gesture that had become their signature. "I'm proud of you, for everything you've become, everything you've built." "We've built," she corrected. "None of this would exist without you." "I think you're wrong about that," he said thoughtfully. "You would have found your way eventually. You're stronger than you know, maybe, but I'm glad I didn't have to find it alone." Inside the house, Hope's baby monitor crackled softly with the sounds of a child settling into sleep, little sighs and the rustle of blankets and the occasional soft word spoken to her elephant. Soon there would be quiet, and Janka and Cristiano would go inside to their own bed, to their own dreams, to the life they'd built one careful day at a time. "Sire Cristiano," she said as they stood to go inside. "Yeah, I want to tell you something I've never told you before." He paused, concern flickering across his face. "What is it? The day I met you at the diner, I almost walked away. I sat in that booth for 10 minutes before you arrived, and I almost left. I was so scared of getting attached to anything, even a business arrangement." "What stopped you?" Janka smiled, remembering that moment of decision that had changed everything. "Hope. Not our hope, but the idea of hope. I realized I was tired of running from possibility. I'm glad you stayed." "Me too." She stood on her tiptoes to kiss him, soft and sweet and full of all the tomorrows they were still planning together. "Me too." Years later, when Hope was old enough to ask about how her parents met, they would tell her about contracts and coincidences, about grapes and guest houses, about two people who were brave enough to let love grow in the space between what they expected and what they found. They would tell her about choosing each other, every day, in the small moments and the big ones. They would tell her that love wasn't about finding someone perfect, but about finding someone worth fighting for. And they would tell her that sometimes the best love stories are the ones that begin with business and end with family, that start with fear and end with home. But for now, as they walked hand in hand into the house where their daughter slept peacefully, where the kitchen still smelled like the bread they'd baked together, where the walls held photographs of a family that grew from hope itself, Janka simply felt grateful. Grateful for the bus ticket that had brought her here. Grateful for the contract that had become a promise. Grateful for the man who'd taught her that home wasn't a place. It was a choice you made every day to stay and fight and love and build something beautiful from the ashes of what came before. Outside, The vineyard settled into evening quiet, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of life continuing. Owls calling, wind through leaves, the eternal rhythm of a world that kept turning, kept growing, kept offering second chances to those brave enough to take them. And in a house filled with love and laughter and the sweet dreams of a little girl named Hope, a family slept peacefully, knowing that tomorrow would bring new adventures, new challenges, and new opportunities to choose each other all over again. It was, Yanka thought as sleep claimed her, exactly the kind of love story she'd always hoped was possible, but had never dared to believe she deserved, until now. Karastitia, what did you learn from this story? Have you ever found love in the most unexpected place? Would you have made the same choice as Yanka? Your participation in our channel is very important to us. Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. Abandoned by her rich husband and pregnant with twins, but the doctor saved her life forever. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. The pregnancy test hadn't stopped shaking in her hands, even after 30 minutes. Monroe Hale sat alone in the sterile waiting room of Baltimore Memorial Hospital, her oversized Ravens t-shirt stretched across her 20-week belly, wondering how a piece of plastic could hold so much weight. 2 pink lines, 2 babies, and 0 partners. The evening light filtering through the hospital windows cast long shadows across the empty chairs, each one a reminder of the space beside her, where Graham should have been. The same Graham who'd smiled through their wedding vows last spring, who'd talked about their future family over morning coffee, who'd left a post-it note reading, "Following my dreams," on their refrigerator 3 weeks ago. The same Graham who hadn't answered a single call since. Monroe adjusted her position on the hard plastic chair, her hand instinctively moving to cradle her growing bump. The gold earrings her mother had given her for graduation clinked softly as she shook her head, trying to clear the fog of exhaustion. 24 hours of teaching 7th grade math, and her feet felt like lead weights. But it wasn't the physical exhaustion that threatened to break her. It was the silence. "Ms. Hale?" The nurse's voice cut through her thoughts. "Dr. Thorne will see you now." Monroe gathered her worn leather bag, the one she'd splurged on during better days, and followed the nurse down the corridor. Each step echoed against the linoleum floors, a countdown to another conversation she'd have to face alone, another reminder that she was carrying twice the joy and twice the terror. The examination room was colder than she expected, or maybe it was just her nerves. The paper crinkled beneath her as she settled onto the examination table, her fingers absently tracing the pattern of her stretch marks through her shirt. The anatomy scan, the big one, the appointment, where they'd tell her if both babies were healthy. If a gentle knock interrupted her spiral. The door opened, and Dr. Lucian Thorne stepped in, his presence filling the room without overwhelming it. He moved with a quiet grace that seemed at odds with his tall frame, his blue-gray eyes scanning her chart with focused attention. "Good evening, Miss Hale," he said, his voice carrying a warmth that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I see we're looking at twins today." He glanced up from the chart, and something in his expression shifted when he noticed her solitude. Monroe straightened her spine, summoning the strength her mama had taught her never to lose. "That's right. Though they're taking turns using my bladder as a trampoline, so I'm pretty sure they're already here." The joke fell flat in the space between them, but Dr. Thorne's lips curved slightly. Humor in the face of discomfort. That's a valuable skill in pregnancy. He pulled up a rolling stool, maintaining a professional distance. "I understand this is your first visit with us. Would you like to tell me what brought you to change providers?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Monroe's fingers found her earrings again, twisting them as she searched for words that wouldn't crack. "My previous doctor. She was recommended by my husband, ex-husband, soon-to-be ex-husband." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "I needed a fresh start." Dr. Thorne's pen paused over her chart. For a moment, the professional mask slipped, and Monroe caught a glimpse of something familiar in his eyes. Understanding, maybe, or recognition, but it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "Fresh starts are valid medical decisions too," he said quietly, returning to his notes. "Now let's meet these acrobats who've been keeping you up at night." As he prepared the ultrasound machine, Monroe noticed the way his hands moved, confident but gentle, like someone used to handling fragile things. The wedding ring was conspicuously absent from his left hand, but the pale band of skin where it once sat told its own story. The gel was cold against her skin, and Monroe sucked in a sharp breath. "Doctor." Thorne murmured an apology, his focus entirely on the screen as he moved the wand across her belly. The room filled with a rapid whooshing sound, 2 distinct heartbeats, strong and steady. "There they are," he said softly, and for the first time, his smile reached his eyes. "Baby A is right here." He pointed to the screen where a tiny hand seemed to wave. "And baby B," the wand shifted slightly, "is doing somersaults." Monroe's vision blurred as she watched her children dance on the screen. Her children. Not Graham's abandonment, not her failure, but her children. "They're okay," she whispered, hating how small her voice sounded. Dr. Thorne turned to face her fully, his expression softening. "They're more than okay, Miss Hale. They're perfect." The tears she'd been holding back for weeks finally spilled over. "Doctor." Thorne quietly handed her a tissue, pretending to study the monitor while she collected herself. In that moment of shared silence, something shifted, like a key turning in a lock neither of them knew existed. "Thank you," Monroe managed, dabbing at her eyes. "I haven't had much perfect lately." "Perfect is overrated," Dr. Thorne replied, his voice carrying a weight that suggested personal experience. "But strong." He gestured to the screen where both babies continued their underwater ballet. "That runs in the family." As Monroe left the hospital that evening, the sun had already set, but something else had risen, a tiny spark of hope, fragile as a newborn's grip, but just as persistent. She didn't notice Dr. Thorne watching her from his office window, or the way his hand moved unconsciously to his own chest, where beneath his pristine white coat, another heart was beginning to remember how to beat. The waiting room remained empty, but the silence had changed. Sometimes that's where healing begins. The morning sickness hadn't gotten the memo about mornings. Monroe leaned against the cool tile wall of the hospital bathroom, her work blazer draped over the sink, wondering if her students' pre-algebra test papers would survive being graded through a haze of nausea. 23 weeks pregnant, and her body still hadn't decided if it was growing babies or staging a revolution. "Ms. Harrison!" she called out weakly to her classroom aide, who was hovering anxiously outside the door. "Could you please watch my class for 10 more minutes?" The teenagers' voices echoed down the hallway from her classroom, room 204, Baltimore East Middle School, where they were supposed to be solving equations, not plotting their escape. "Of course, Ms. Hale. Should I call someone?" "No, I'm fine. Just..." Another wave hit, and Monroe closed her eyes, breathing through it. The twins were particularly active today, as if competing for Olympic medals in synchronized swimming or boxing. The bathroom door creaked open, and Monroe tensed, preparing her teacher voice to send any curious student back to class. But instead of teenage sneakers, she saw sensible brown leather shoes and the hem of dark blue scrubs. "Miss Hale?" That voice. Monroe's eyes snapped open to find Dr. Lucian Thorne standing in the doorway, concern etched across his features. Of all the bathrooms in all of Baltimore, she had to be throwing up in the one next to where he was giving a community health lecture. "This isn't what it looks like," Monroe managed, attempting to straighten up. Her carefully twisted hair was coming undone, small coils framing her face. "I mean, it is exactly what it looks like, but I'm fine." "Fascinating definition of fine you have there." His voice was gentle, but his eyes were scanning her professionally. "May I?" He gestured to her wrist, and Monroe nodded, too exhausted to maintain her usual walls. His fingers were cool against her pulse point, and for a moment, the only sound was the tick of his watch. "Your heart rate's elevated. When was the last time you ate?" Monroe's silence was answer enough. "That's what I thought." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a protein bar. At her raised eyebrow, he actually looked slightly embarrassed. "I keep them for my long shifts. It's not exactly a gourmet meal, but better than nothing." Monroe accepted the bar, their fingers brushing briefly. "Thank you. Though I hope you don't make a habit of following sick women into bathrooms." Something that might have been a smile tugged at his lips. "Only the ones who are carrying twins and skipping meals." He paused, then added more softly, "I was here giving a lecture on prenatal nutrition to senior students." Ironic, isn't it? Monroe unwrapped the bar, taking a small bite. "Let me guess. How to take care of yourself while growing humans 101. More like basic nutrition for future healthcare providers," he corrected, leaning against the doorframe, "though your title has a better ring to it." The protein bar was helping, settling her stomach enough that she could stand properly. Well, Dr. Thorne, as a teacher, I'd say your timing is impeccable. Though your choice of classroom is questionable, this time he did smile, brief but genuine. Sometimes the most important lessons happen outside the classroom. He hesitated, then added, speaking of which, I noticed you missed your follow-up appointment last week. Monroe busied herself with smoothing her shirt over her bump. Things have been complicated. The school board cut our planning periods, and with Graham's lawyer sending papers every other day. Graham? Dr. Thorne's voice remained neutral, but something shifted in his posture. My ex, soon-to-be ex. Monroe's fingers found her earrings again, a tell she couldn't seem to break. He's decided he wants to be involved after all, just not with me. Understanding darkened Dr. Thorne's eyes. Entire custody. He says he wants to ensure proper care and upbringing. His words, not mine. Monroe's laugh was hollow. Funny how he remembers proper care now, after leaving me to handle 28 morning sickness episodes alone. Yes, I counted. Dr. Thorne was quiet for a moment, his hands in his pockets. 28 sounds like 28 too many to face alone. He pulled out a business card, hesitated, then turned it over and wrote something on the back. This is my direct line, for medical emergencies. Monroe took the card, noting the neat, precise handwriting. Is morning sickness in the faculty bathroom considered an emergency? It is when it's accompanied by skipped meals and missed appointments. His tone was professional again, but his eyes held something warmer. The twins need you strong, Ms. Hale, and strength sometimes means accepting help. The bell rang, startling them both. Monroe could hear her students shuffling, gathering their things. I should go teach the future of America. Probably. He stepped back, giving her space. But first, finish that protein bar. Doctor's orders. Monroe slipped the card into her blazer pocket, next to her heart. Thank you, Dr. Thorne, for the bar and the emergency line. Lucian, he said quietly, almost to himself. Yes, my name is Lucian. Before Monroe could respond, he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the hall. Through the open door, she could hear him explaining something to Miss Harrison, probably assuring her that everything was fine. Monroe looked at herself in the mirror, adjusting her twist back into place. Her reflection showed the same face as always, brown eyes tired but determined, skin glowing with what her mother insisted was the famous pregnancy radiance, but felt more like perpetual overheating. But something was different. Maybe it was the protein bar settling in her stomach, or maybe it was the weight of the business card in her pocket, but she felt steadier. The second bell rang. Her students would be waiting. Monroe straightened her shoulders, channeling her mother's strength and her father's determination. One hand moved to her belly, where the twins had finally settled into a gentler dance. All right, little ones, she whispered. Let's go teach some algebra. And maybe, she touched the pocket with the card. And maybe we're not as alone as we thought. Outside, the autumn sun painted Baltimore in shades of gold and promise, while inside room 204, life continued its messy, beautiful dance. And in a hospital across town, a certain doctor found himself staring at his phone, wondering if helping a patient find her strength might help him remember his own. Numbers had always made sense to Monroe. 7 times 8 would always be 56. The square root of 100 would always be 10. But sitting in her obstetrician's office on a grey Tuesday afternoon, staring at the stack of legal documents in her lap, no equation could help her make sense of Graham's demands. Full custody. The words tasted bitter in her mouth. He wants full custody of babies he hasn't even met. Her fingers crumpled the edge of the papers, where Graham's lawyer had helpfully highlighted the important parts in neon yellow. As if the word unfit needed any more emphasis, the twins shifted restlessly, responding to her agitation. 26 weeks now, and they seemed to dance to her emotions like leaves in the wind. Monroe forced herself to breathe deeply, the way her mother had taught her during piano lessons. In through the nose, out through the mouth, count to 4, find your center. A knock at the door broke her concentration. Dr. Thorne, Lucian, she reminded herself, though she hadn't used his first name aloud yet, entered with his usual quiet grace. But today, something was different. The shadows under his eyes were deeper, his normally pristine white coat slightly rumpled at the edges. Miss Hale, he started, then paused, noticing the papers in her lap. His expression shifted, almost imperceptibly. I see you've received them too. Monroe's head snapped up. Toys too. Lucian ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd never seen him make before. It made him look younger, more vulnerable. "I've been served with a subpoena. Your ex-husband's lawyer wants my testimony about your prenatal care." The room seemed to tilt slightly. Monroe gripped the armrests of her chair, her gold earrings catching the fluorescent light as she shook her head. That's impossible. Doctor-patient confidentiality can be challenged in custody cases." Lucian's voice was gentle but firm. "But Miss Hale, Monroe, I need you to know something." He pulled up his stool, sitting at eye level with her. "Everything in your file shows exemplary prenatal care. You've followed every recommendation, made every important appointment, maintained your health despite significant stress. If they want my professional opinion, they'll get it." Monroe studied his face, searching for any hint of pity. She found none. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve to know." He reached for her chart, but his hand hesitated over it. "And because I've been where you are. Different circumstances, but the same courtroom, the same type of lawyers who highlight words like weapons." Understanding dawned. "Your divorce?" Lucian nodded, his jaw tightening slightly. 3 years ago, my son, James. I only see him every other weekend now. His mother's lawyer painted a very convincing picture of a doctor too busy for fatherhood. The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken pain. Monroe wanted to reach out, to offer some comfort, but her own hands were shaking too much to be steady. "I'm sorry," she said finally, meaning it. No one should have to fight for the right to love their own children. Something flickered in Lucian's eyes. Recognition, maybe, or remembered grief. No, they shouldn't. He straightened, professionalism settling back over him like armor. "Now, let's check on these little ones." The exam proceeded as usual, but the silence between them had changed. It was fuller now, laden with shared understanding. The twins' heartbeats filled the room, strong, steady, defiant against the world's chaos. "They're growing perfectly," Lucian noted, his voice warming as he pointed to the screen. "Baby A is sucking their thumb, and baby B appears to be doing the Macarena." Monroe laughed despite herself, watching her children dance on the grainy screen. "They get that from me. I used to teach dance classes in college." "Used to." Life happened. Bills, responsibilities. She trailed off, remembering weekend workshops and the joy of movement. Graham said it wasn't practical. Lucian's hand stilled on the ultrasound wand. "And what do you say?" The question caught her off guard. What did she say? When was the last time anyone had asked? "I say." Monroe watched her babies move, strong and free in their private ocean. "I say maybe it's time to remember who I was before anyone told me who to be." Lucian nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Now that sounds like the mother these twins deserve. After the appointment, Monroe found herself lingering in the hospital parking lot, watching the sunset paint Baltimore's skyline in shades of purple and gold. Her phone buzzed. Another email from Graham's lawyer, no doubt, but for once, she didn't immediately reach for it. Instead, she pulled up her music app and scrolled to an old playlist labeled Dance Studio Days. The first notes of a forgotten melody filled her car, and her body remembered the rhythm, the freedom, the joy. In the rearview mirror, she caught a glimpse of movement. Dr. Thorne was leaving for the day, his tall frame silhouetted against the hospital lights. He paused at his car, phone pressed to his ear, and even from a distance, Monroe could read the tension in his shoulders. A custody call, maybe, or just another battle in the war they both seemed to be fighting. The twins kicked in perfect synchronization, as if applauding. Monroe placed both hands on her belly, feeling their strength, their possibility. "Okay, little ones," she whispered. "Lesson number 1. Sometimes the bravest dance is the one you do alone." She paused, watching as Lucian's car pulled away. "But maybe sometimes the best dances are the ones where someone unexpected joins in." The music played on, filling her car with memories of who she used to be and whispers of who she might become. Tomorrow would bring more lawyers, more highlighted documents, more battles. But tonight, in a hospital parking lot as day faded to dusk, Monroe Hale remembered how to dance. The grocery store at 11 p.m. was its own kind of liminal space. Monroe wandered the aisles of Martinez Market, her shopping basket heavy with the random cravings that had driven her out of bed: pickles, chocolate ice cream, and inexplicably, raw carrots. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting strange shadows in the nearly empty store. 28 weeks pregnant, and sleep had become a distant memory. Between the twins' nocturnal gymnastics and the mounting pressure of Graham's custody suit, Monroe's nights had become an endless parade of worry and watermelon cravings. Her loose Baltimore Ravens sleep shirt stretched over her growing belly as she reached for a jar of peanut butter on the top shelf. "Let me help you with that." A familiar hand reached past her, easily grabbing the jar. Monroe turned to find Lucian Thorne standing there, looking decidedly undoctor-like in faded jeans and a grey Henley. The shadows under his eyes matched her own. "We have to stop meeting like this," Monroe said, accepting the peanut butter. "People will talk. At this hour, the only people awake are the sleep-deprived and the guilty." He glanced at her basket. "Although that combination suggests a bit of both." Monroe looked down at her mismatched groceries and laughed. "Judge not, Dr. Thorne. Your cart isn't exactly a model of nutritional excellence either." She nodded toward his basket, which contained coffee, more coffee, and a single sad-looking TV dinner. "Touché." His smile was tired but genuine. "Long shift, long day. The twins have decided sleep is for the weak." She shifted her weight, trying to find a comfortable position. "You? Emergency C-section at 8, then paperwork, then more paperwork." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she was beginning to recognize as his tell for stress. "Then James's mother called to change this weekend's custody schedule. Again." The fluorescent lights flickered, casting strange patterns on the linoleum floor. Somewhere in the store, an old song played softly, something about midnight and chance meetings. "How old is he?" Monroe asked quietly. "James?" 7. Lucian's voice softened. "He likes dinosaurs and hates Brussels sprouts. He has my eyes, but his mother's laugh." He paused, looking down at his coffee-filled cart. "At least, I think he still hates Brussels sprouts. So it's hard to keep up with preferences when you're working from a calendar." Monroe touched her belly, feeling the twins shift. "I'm afraid of missing things," she admitted. "If Graham wins, there will be so many moments I'll never get back." "Monroe," Lucian's voice was firm but gentle. "May I show you something?" She nodded, curious. He pulled out his phone, quickly finding what he wanted, then held it out to her. The screen showed a carefully organized spreadsheet. "What am I looking at? Every moment I've had with James for the past 3 years, every park visit, every scraped knee, every bedtime story. Not because I'm obsessive, but because—" He took a deep breath. "Because when you only get pieces of your child's life, you learn to make each piece count." Monroe studied the spreadsheet, noting the detailed entries. October 12th. James lost tooth during dinosaur documentary. Kept tooth under pillow despite Mom's house being next day. Wanted Dad's tooth fairy to have a turn. He got $2 from me, 3 from his mum's tooth fairy. Lucian's smile held equal parts joy and pain. "We're still competing on that front." The overhead lights hummed, a quiet soundtrack to their midnight confession. Monroe handed back the phone, her fingers brushing his briefly. "Oh, thank you," she said softly, "for showing me that. Thank you for understanding it." He glanced at her basket again. "Though I feel obligated as your doctor to point out that ice cream and pickles isn't exactly a balanced midnight meal. Says the man buying enough coffee to fuel a small army. Fair point." He hesitated, then gestured toward the store's small deli section. "They make decent sandwiches here. If you're interested in actual food." Monroe should have said no, should have remembered professional boundaries and complicated situations, but exhaustion had worn down her usual defenses, and the twins were doing something that felt suspiciously like encouraging kicks. "Only if you're willing to trade some of that coffee for my chocolate ice cream," she found herself saying. They ended up at one of the store's small tables, sharing turkey sandwiches and trading stories in the quiet hours between yesterday and tomorrow. Monroe told him about her students' latest mathematical adventures, and he shared tales from his residency days. The fluorescent light still hummed, but somehow it felt more like starlight. "Can I ask you something?" Monroe said, watching him doctor his coffee with an alarming amount of sugar. "That spreadsheet. Does it help, making order out of chaos?" Lucian was quiet for a moment, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. "It helps me remember that even broken things can be beautiful. A scattered constellation is still made of stars." The twins kicked in tandem, as if applauding his poetry. Monroe pressed a hand to her side, and without thinking, reached for Lucian's hand. "Here," she said, placing his palm where the strongest kicks were. "They seem to like your voice." The moment stretched between them, delicate as spun sugar. Lucian's hand was warm against her belly, and his eyes held a mix of wonder and something deeper, something neither of them was ready to name. "Strong," he murmured. "Like their mother." The store's ancient sound system crackled, switching songs. Patsy Cline's voice filled the empty aisles, singing about falling to pieces. Monroe slowly withdrew her hand, and Lucian straightened, both of them remembering who and where they were. "I should get home," Monroe said, gathering her strange assortment of groceries. "Early class tomorrow. And I have prenatal appointments at 8. Lucian stood, collecting his coffee arsenal. "Try to get some rest, Ms. Hale." "Monroe," she corrected softly. "After midnight pickle runs. I think we're on a first-name basis." His smile reached his eyes this time. "Monroe," he agreed. "Sleep well." They parted ways in the parking lot, each carrying their midnight provisions and unspoken words. Monroe watched his car disappear into the Baltimore night, then turned her face up to the stars, scattered but somehow perfect in their chaos. The twins moved again, gentler now, like they were settling in for sleep. "I know, little ones," she whispered. "I know. Sometimes the best conversations happen in the strangest places." As she drove home, the night wrapped around her like a blanket, and for the first time in weeks, the weight of Graham's legal threats felt a little lighter. Sometimes strength came in spreadsheets and shared sandwiches. Sometimes healing happened in fluorescent-lit spaces between yesterday and tomorrow. And sometimes, just sometimes, the universe conspired to put two broken people in the same grocery store at exactly the right moment. The courthouse steps were slick with November rain. Monroe gripped the metal railing, her 30-week pregnant body protesting each careful step. The preliminary custody hearing loomed ahead like a storm cloud, and her sensible black flats felt anything but steady on the wet stone. "Tire careful," a familiar voice came from behind her, followed by the sensation of a strong hand at her elbow. "These steps are a lawsuit waiting to happen." Monroe didn't need to turn to know it was Lucian. His presence had become something her body recognized, like the way the twins always seemed to settle when he was near. "My hero," she said dryly, but accepted his support. "Though I'm pretty sure this violates about 12 different doctor-patient boundaries. I'm here as an expert witness, not your doctor." His voice was professional, but his hand remained steady at her elbow. "Besides, preventing a fall on courthouse steps falls under the Hippocratic Oath. First, do no harm." They reached the top of the steps, and Monroe turned to thank him, only to freeze at the sight of a familiar figure approaching through the rain. Graham Calloway stood under a sleek black umbrella, his tailored suit as immaculate as ever. He looked exactly as he had the day he'd left, polished, controlled, and completely untouchable. The only difference was the blonde woman beside him, clutching his arm and wearing an engagement ring that Monroe recognized from their joint bank account statements. "Monroe!" Graham's voice carried across the wet courtyard, smooth as aged whiskey and twice as bitter. "You're looking healthy." Lucian's hand tightened slightly on her elbow before dropping away. Monroe straightened her spine, grateful for the simple black maternity dress her mother had helped her choose. "Graham, I see you've been busy." The blonde, Veronica something, if Monroe remembered the social media posts correctly, had the grace to look uncomfortable. Graham merely smiled, the same smile he'd used when convincing Monroe to give up her dance classes. "So that's just ensuring our children have the best possible future. I trust you received the updated custody proposal." "You mean your demand for full custody with supervised visitation for me?" Monroe's gold earrings caught the grey light as she tilted her chin up. "Yes, my lawyer found it fascinating reading." "It's for the best, Monroe. You know that." Graham's eyes flickered to Lucian, who stood silently beside her. "And who might this be?" "Dr. Lucian Thorne." Lucian's voice was cool and professional. "I'm here as an expert witness regarding Ms. Hale's prenatal care." Something sharp flashed in Graham's eyes. "Ah, yes, the devoted physician. Your reputation precedes you, Doctor, especially regarding personal involvement with patients." Monroe felt Lucian stiffen beside her. Before either man could speak, the courthouse doors opened, and her lawyer appeared. "Miss Hale, they're ready for us." The next 2 hours passed in a blur of legal terminology and thinly veiled accusations. Graham's lawyer painted a picture of an unstable single mother, while Monroe's attorney presented medical records showing exemplary prenatal care and letters from her school principal, praising her dedication. Through it all, Monroe kept her hands folded over her belly, feeling the twins move restlessly. She didn't look at Graham, didn't acknowledge his occasional sighs or whispered comments to Veronica. Instead, she focused on breathing, on staying strong for her children. When Lucian took the stand, his testimony was precise and professional. "Yes, Ms. Hale had followed every medical recommendation. Yes, her pregnancy was progressing beautifully, despite significant stress. No, he had no concerns about her ability to care for twins. "And would you say your relationship with Ms. Hale is strictly professional?" Graham's lawyer asked, her smile sharp as a scalpel. Lucian met Monroe's eyes briefly before answering. "I provide Ms. Hale with medical care of the highest standard. My primary concern is the health of her and her unborn children." "That's not what I asked, Doctor." "Objection?" Monroe's lawyer called. "Relevance?" The judge sustained the objection, but the damage was done. Monroe could feel Graham's satisfied smirk without looking at him. After the hearing, Monroe found herself in the courthouse bathroom, splashing cold water on her face. The judge had scheduled another hearing for next month, closer to her due date. More time, more stress, more fights over children who weren't even born yet. The door opened, and Monroe tensed, expecting Veronica or one of Graham's lawyers. Instead, she saw Lucian's reflection in the mirror. "This is the women's bathroom," she said, attempting a smile. "I know, I'm adding it to my list of professional boundaries crossed today." He held out a paper cup of water. "You should stay hydrated." Monroe accepted the water, their fingers brushing. "Thank you for everything today. Your testimony was the truth." He leaned against the sink, his usual composure cracking slightly, though I wanted to say more. "About how you sing to the twins during examinations, how you've memorized every developmental milestone, how you're already more of a parent than—" He stopped, running a hand through his hair. "Than Graham will ever be," Monroe finished softly. "It's okay. You can say it. It wouldn't have helped. Trust me, I learned that lesson in my own custody battle." He checked his watch. "I have to get back to the hospital." "Will you be okay?" Monroe studied her reflection. Tired eyes, but steady gaze. Her mother's strength in her shoulders, her father's determination in her jaw. "I will be. The twins have a dance recital scheduled for this afternoon. Very exclusive performance, audience of one." Lucian's smile was small but warm. "Let me guess. Interpretive dance to express their feelings about legal proceedings. More like the Macarena on my bladder." She touched her belly, feeling them move. "But hey, at least they've got rhythm. Like their mother." The words were quiet, almost lost in the hum of the bathroom fan. Monroe met his eyes in the mirror. "Lucian, I know." He straightened, doctor mode settling back over him like a familiar coat. "Professional boundaries." "Right." The word tasted like copper in her mouth. "Professional boundaries." He left first, the door closing softly behind him. Monroe stayed a moment longer, watching the fluorescent lights flicker above her. The twins kicked in perfect synchronization, as if trying to tell her something important. "I know, little ones," she whispered. "Sometimes the hardest boundaries to keep are the ones we're not sure we want." Outside, the November rain continued to fall on Baltimore, washing away footprints and almost moments, while inside the courthouse bathroom, Monroe Hale added another crack to her carefully constructed walls, right next to the one shaped like a doctor's gentle hands and understanding eyes. December arrived in Baltimore like a whisper, bringing soft snow and longer nights. Monroe sat in her classroom after hours, 32 weeks pregnant and surrounded by half-graded math tests, when the first contraction hit. Not labor, she knew that much from her endless research, but Braxton Hicks, her body's way of practicing for the main event. Still, it was enough to make her pause, one hand pressed against her side, while the other clutched a red pen suspended over Jenny Martinez's creative interpretation of fractions. Through the classroom windows, she could see snow beginning to fall, turning the school parking lot into a blank canvas. Her phone buzzed. Another email from Graham's lawyer. They'd been relentless since the courthouse hearing, picking apart every aspect of her life, her bank statements, her work schedule, even her grocery receipts. The latest demanded a detailed childcare plan for when she returned to teaching. The twins shifted restlessly, perhaps sensing her tension. Monroe set down her pen and began to hum softly. An old lullaby her mother used to sing, something about starlight and promises. Slowly, they settled, just as the classroom door opened. "Miss Harrison said I'd find you here." Monroe looked up to find Lucian standing in the doorway, still in his hospital scrubs with snowflakes melting in his hair. They hadn't spoken since the courthouse, their last appointment handled by his colleague, Dr. Chen. Professional boundaries. They'd both agreed, yet here he was, looking somehow both out of place and perfectly right among the student artwork and math posters. "Parent-teacher conferences," he asked, stepping inside. "Test grading." Monroe gestured to the papers scattered across her desk. Apparently, the quadratic formula is open to creative interpretation. Ah, yes. I remember trying to convince my algebra teacher that x2 could identify as x3 if it believed in itself. He moved closer, concern flickering across his features. You okay? You seem like I'm having Braxton Hicks contractions while trying to decode teenage mathematical philosophy. She attempted a smile. Oh, just another Tuesday in the life of a pregnant math teacher. Lucien pulled up one of the student chairs, looking almost comical with his long legs folded into the small space. You should be resting, says the man who just worked a 12-hour shift. She raised an eyebrow. Don't think I haven't noticed the schedule changes. You've been avoiding me. Professional. Boundaries. I know. Monroe winced as another practice contraction tightened across her belly. Though I'm not sure professional boundaries include tracking down your patient at her workplace. Lucien was quiet for a moment, watching the snow fall outside. James had his winter concert tonight. Piano recital. His voice was soft, almost lost in the hum of the classroom heater. I was supposed to be there. Caroline, his mother, changed the schedule last minute. Again, understanding dawned. So you came here instead. I came here because sitting alone in my office thinking about another missed moment felt like drowning. He met her eyes. And because every time I close my eyes, I see you on those courthouse steps, facing down the man who tried to break you, And you what? Monroe's heart was beating faster than any Braxton Hicks could explain. And I realized that all these professional boundaries we're so carefully maintaining. He ran a hand through his snow-damp hair. They're not protecting anyone. They're just keeping us both alone. The classroom felt suddenly too small, too warm. Monroe pushed back from her desk, needing space to think. Lucien, we can't. Graham's lawyers are already implying. I know. He stood too, careful to maintain distance. Trust me, I know exactly how this looks. The doctor falling for his patient. The divorced dad getting too close to a custody case that mirrors his own. Every ethical line blurred beyond recognition. Falling for. The words hung in the air between them, delicate as the snowflakes outside. Before he could answer, Monroe's phone buzzed again. Graham's name flashed on the screen, along with a text. Amended custody proposal. You might want to sit down for this one. The twins kicked hard, picking up on her sudden spike of anxiety. Lucien noticed her expression change and was beside her in an instant, professional mask back in place. What's wrong? Graham. She showed him the text. He's going to use this. Use us. Whatever this is. Let him try. Lucien's voice was quiet, but fierce. Some things are worth fighting for. My babies, Monroe whispered. Yes, he hesitated, then added softly, and maybe something else too. The snow fell faster outside, turning Baltimore into a snow globe of possibilities and fears. Monroe's hand found her earrings, her mother's strength, her father's courage. The twins moved again, gentler now, like they were trying to tell her something important. I can't lose them, she said finally. I won't. You won't. Lucien took a step back, respecting her unspoken decision. But Monroe, you won't lose yourself either. Not this time. She looked at him then, really looked, at the tired lines around his eyes, the compassion in his gaze, the way he stood like a man used to weathering storms alone. What about you? What will you lose? Nothing I haven't lost before. His smile was sad but genuine. Sight except maybe the chance to tell you that watching you fight for your children, for yourself, it's made me remember what courage looks like. The classroom clock ticked steadily, counting down moments they couldn't afford to have. Outside, the world was turning white, covering Baltimore in a blanket of new beginnings and missed chances. I should go, Lucien said finally. Early surgeries tomorrow. Monroe nodded, not trusting her voice. He paused at the door, snow swirling in behind him. For what it's worth, he added quietly, some boundaries aren't meant to protect us. They're meant to test how much we're willing to risk for what matters. After he left, Monroe stood at the window, watching his figure disappear into the snowy night. The twins danced their own private ballet, perhaps protesting the sudden absence of his voice, or perhaps reminding her that some choices weren't really choices at all. They were just the heart recognizing its own rhythm in another's silence. She turned back to her desk, to the pile of tests waiting to be graded. Jenny Martinez's creative fractions stared up at her, and suddenly Monroe understood what the girl had been trying to say. Sometimes the whole was greater than the sum of its parts. Sometimes the equation didn't need solving. It just needed courage to be written. The snow continued to fall, erasing footprints and boundaries alike, while inside room 204, Monroe Hale added another equation to life's complicated mathematics: how to measure the distance between what we want and what we dare to reach for. The emergency room lights were too bright, too harsh, making everything feel surreal. Monroe lay on her side in the hospital bed, 34 weeks pregnant and trying not to panic, as monitors beeped steadily around her. Outside her room, Baltimore Memorial Hospital hummed with its usual midnight energy, but inside, time seemed suspended. It had started during fifth period, a sharp pain different from her usual Braxton Hicks, followed by spotting that sent Miss Harrison running for the school nurse. Now, hours later, Monroe watched the fetal monitor's steady rhythms, each beep a reminder that the twins were okay, for now. Preterm labor, Dr. Chen had said, her kind face serious. We need to stop it. I've paged Dr. Thorne. He knows your case best. Monroe hadn't argued, couldn't argue, not when her baby's safety was at stake, not when every instinct screamed for the one person who could make this less terrifying. The door opened quietly, and Lucian stepped in. He looked like he'd been running, tie askew, hair mussed, eyes intense with concern. 2 weeks had passed since their conversation in her classroom, 2 weeks of careful distance and professional courtesy. But now, I came as soon as I got the page. He moved to check her monitors, his doctor's mask firmly in place, but his hands trembled slightly as he reviewed her chart. How's the pain? Manageable. Monroe tried to smile, but it felt wobbly. Though your twins are apparently as dramatic as their mother, our twins tend to have excellent timing. The words slipped out before he could catch them, an echo of their easy banter from better days. He cleared his throat. The medication seems to be working. Contractions are spacing out. Monroe nodded, then winced as another pain wrapped around her middle. Without thinking, she reached for his hand. He took it immediately, professional boundaries forgotten. Breathe through it, he murmured. That's it. Just like that. When the contraction passed, neither of them let go. The monitors beeped steadily in the background, counting heartbeats and moments and things left unsaid. I was so scared, Monroe whispered finally. All I could think was, Graham doesn't even know their names, the ones I picked. He's fighting so hard for them, and he doesn't even know I want to name them after the stars. Lucian's thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. Tell me, Celeste and Nova. Her free hand rested on her belly, feeling their movements. Because they're the light in my darkness. Is that too cheesy? It's perfect. His voice was soft, but his eyes held something fierce. They're perfect. The moment stretched between them, delicate as spider silk. Then Monroe's phone buzzed on the bedside table. Graham's lawyer, again. Reality crashed back in. Lucian started to pull away, but Monroe held on. Stay, she said. Please. Not as my doctor. Just stay. He sank into the chair beside her bed, still holding her hand. Monroe, if anyone finds out, I know. She met his eyes. But I'm tired of being afraid. Of Graham. Of lawyers. Of losing everything. I'm tired of pretending that what I feel for you is just what? Just gratitude. Or hormones. Or two lonely people recognizing their own pain in each other. She took a shaky breath. Because it's more than that, isn't it? Lucian was quiet for a long moment, watching the snow fall outside her window. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. The first time I saw you in that waiting room, something in me recognized something in you. Not just the loneliness or the battle scars, but the strength, the light. He squeezed her hand. I've been fighting it ever since. Why? Because I'm terrified of failing another family, of not being enough. Again, the confession hung in the air between them. James, I missed so much. First steps, first words. Now I get photos of moments I should have been there for. Lucian. Monroe tugged his hand until he looked at her. You're not failing anyone. You're fighting like me. The twins kicked then, strong and sure, making the monitors jump. Lucian laughed softly, some of the tension easing from his shoulders. Celeste and Nova seemed to agree. They're smart girls. Monroe smiled, then sobered. Graham's lawyers will use this against me. Say I'm unstable, making poor choices. Let them try. Lucian's jaw set in a determined line. Some choices aren't poor, they're just brave. A nurse appeared in the doorway, then hesitated, seeing their joined hands. Lucian didn't let go. Instead, he stood, using his body to shield their connection from view. Try to rest, he said softly. I'll be here. Not as your doctor. Just here. Monroe nodded, suddenly exhausted. The medication was making her drowsy, but she fought to keep her eyes open. Lucian? When this is over, when the twins are born and the custody battle is done, will you teach me to dance again? His smile was like sunrise after a storm. I thought you were the dance teacher. Maybe. She felt herself drifting, anchored only by his hand in hers. But I think some dances are better learned together. The last thing she heard before sleep claimed her was his whispered reply. Then we'll learn together, step by step, beat by beat, until we get it right. Through the hospital window, Baltimore glittered with winter lights, while inside room 412, two hearts found their rhythm in the space between professional and personal, between fear and courage, between what was safe and what was true. And in Monroe's dreams, she danced, not alone, not anymore, while two stars named Celeste and Nova twirled above, lighting the way home. The conference room at Monroe's lawyer's office felt too small for the storm that was brewing. At 36 weeks pregnant, Monroe sat with her back straight despite her exhaustion, one hand resting protectively over Celeste and Nova, while the other gripped a manila envelope that had arrived that morning. Inside were photos, dozens of them. Monroe leaving the hospital after her preterm labor scare, Lucian walking her to her car, their hands clasped in the emergency room. Each image time-stamped, documented, weaponized. Mrs. Calloway, Graham's lawyer began. Ms. Hale, Monroe corrected firmly, her gold earrings catching the winter sunlight. I never changed my name. Miss Hale, the lawyer continued, her smile sharp as broken glass. These photos raise serious concerns about your judgment. Engaging in a romantic relationship with your physician while pregnant with my client's children. Objection. Monroe's lawyer interrupted. This isn't a courtroom, counselor, and there's no evidence of any improper relationship. Graham leaned forward, his expensive suit crinkling slightly. No evidence. She's holding his hand in half these photos. The same doctor who's supposed to be providing expert testimony about her fitness as a mother. Monroe felt the twins shift restlessly, responding to her tension. She thought of Lucian, probably in surgery now, unaware that their careful dance had been captured and twisted into something ugly. She thought of his gentle hands, his quiet strength, the way he'd stayed with her that night in the hospital. Professional boundaries finally crumbling under the weight of something stronger. Let me be clear, Graham continued, his voice smooth as poison. Either Dr. Thorne withdraws as a witness and removes himself from your care immediately, or these photos will be presented at next week's custody hearing, along with documentation of every time he's visited your classroom, every late-night meeting at Martinez Market, every... You had me followed? Monroe's voice was quiet but steady. For how long? Long enough. Graham's smile didn't reach his eyes. I'm protecting our children, Monroe, from poor choices, from instability, from a mother who clearly can't... Can't what? Monroe stood slowly, her hand still cradling her belly. Can't be trusted to know my own heart? Can't be trusted to recognize real care, real support. After years of your controlled version of love, she looked directly at Graham. You don't want custody because you love these girls. You want custody because you can't stand that I might find happiness without you. The room fell silent. Even Graham's lawyer stopped shuffling papers. You have 24 hours to decide, Graham said finally. Dr. Thorne's withdrawal, or these photos go to the judge. Choose wisely. After they left, Monroe's lawyer touched her arm gently. We can fight this. Character assassination isn't... I need a minute, Monroe whispered. Please. Alone in the conference room, Monroe watched Baltimore's winter sky darken with approaching snow. Her phone felt heavy in her hand as she typed out a message to Lucian. We need to talk. Graham has photos. His response came quickly. My office. 30 minutes. The hospital corridors felt longer than usual as Monroe made her way to Lucian's office. A few nurses gave her knowing looks. Apparently, hospital gossip traveled faster than Graham's private investigators. Lucian was waiting, his surgical scrubs replaced by his usual dress shirt and tie. He took one look at her face and closed the door. Show me, he said quietly. Monroe handed him the envelope, watched as he flipped through the photos, his expression growing darker with each image. He wants you to withdraw as a witness, she said. Cut all contact, or he'll use these to paint me as unstable in court. Lucian set the photos down carefully. And what do you want? What I want, Monroe laughed, but it came out more like a sob. I want to have my babies without fear. I want to teach my students without looking over my shoulder. I want—" She touched her belly as the twins kicked. "I want to dance again without someone telling me the music's wrong. Monroe!" Lucian stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of grey in his blue eyes. "Tell me what to do. If you want me to withdraw, to step away." "No." The word came out fierce and certain. "No more stepping away. No more hiding." She met his gaze. "I spent years letting Graham decide what was best for me. Never again. The custody hearing will show exactly what these photos show." Monroe squared her shoulders. "A woman who's learned to recognize real love, a mother who's choosing courage over fear, and a man who's brave enough to stay even when it's hard." Lucian's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining like they'd done this 1,000 times before. "Are you sure? Once we take this stand?" "I'm sure." Monroe squeezed his hand. Celeste and Nova deserve to see their mother fight for joy, for truth, for the kind of love that builds up instead of tearing down. Outside, snow began to fall, thick and fast, turning Baltimore into a world of white possibility. The twins moved in perfect synchronization, as if dancing to music only they could hear. "Then we fight," Lucian said softly. "Together, together," Monroe echoed, and in that word was every dance not danced, every moment not seized, every fear finally faced. The photos lay scattered on Lucian's desk, each one a testament to something Graham had never understood. That real love didn't need to hide. That real strength sometimes looked like holding hands in emergency rooms. That real parenting meant showing your children how to be brave. Monroe touched the nearest photo, where Lucian's hand supported her elbow on the courthouse steps. "Look at us," she whispered. "All this time trying to maintain boundaries, and anyone with eyes could see." "See what?" "That some loves are worth the risk." She smiled up at him, fierce and certain. "That some dances can't be choreographed or controlled. They just have to be lived." Lucian's free hand came to rest beside hers on her belly, feeling Celeste and Nova's strong kicks. "Then let's live it. All of it. The hard parts, and the beautiful ones. Even if we stumble." His smile held all the warmth Graham's had lacked, especially then. "Because that's when we'll hold on tighter." The snow fell harder, erasing the world outside his office window, while inside, 2 hearts beat in time with 2 others, creating a rhythm that no court could judge, no lawyer could twist, no fear could silence. And somewhere in the universe, 2 stars named Celeste and Nova twinkled a little brighter, blessing the dance that was just beginning. The courtroom clock ticked like a metronome, counting down the moments until everything changed. At 38 weeks pregnant, Monroe sat at the defendant's table, her dark blue maternity dress carefully chosen to project stability, strength, motherhood. The twins moved restlessly, perhaps sensing the tension that filled courtroom 3B of the Baltimore County Circuit Court. Graham sat with his legal team, Veronica notably absent. He'd traded his usual power suit for something more subdued. Navy blue, conservative, the costume of a concerned father. The private investigator's photos were arranged neatly in a folder before him, each one a potential weapon. "Your Honor," Graham's lawyer began, "we'd like to call Dr. Lucian Thorne to the stand." Monroe felt rather than saw Lucian rise from his seat in the gallery. He moved with quiet dignity to the witness stand, his shoulders straight despite the weight of what was coming. He'd refused to withdraw his testimony, refused to step away. Sometimes, he'd told her last night over late-night coffee at Martinez Market, the right path is the hardest one. Dr. Thorne, Graham's lawyer smiled like a shark scenting blood. "How long have you been Mrs. Hale's physician?" "Since her 20th week of pregnancy," Lucian answered calmly. "And when she transferred her care to Baltimore Memorial. And in that time, would you say you've developed personal feelings for your patient?" Monroe's lawyer stood. "Objection, Your Honor. Relevance goes to the witness's credibility," Graham's lawyer countered, "and to Ms. Hale's judgment regarding the welfare of the children." The judge considered, then nodded. "I'll allow it. The witness will answer." Lucian met Monroe's eyes briefly before speaking. "My feelings for Miss Hale are not relevant to my medical testimony. What is relevant is her exemplary prenatal care, her quick response to complications, and her unwavering dedication to her daughter's health." "So you deny these photos?" Graham's lawyer held up the first image. Monroe and Lucian in the emergency room, hands clasped. "Deny that you've crossed professional boundaries?" "I deny nothing." Lucian's voice was steady. "I chose to support a patient through a medical crisis, to be present for someone facing challenges I understand personally. If that makes me less credible in your eyes, So be it, but it makes me more human in my own. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Monroe touched her belly as Celeste, or maybe Nova, kicked particularly hard. Her mother, sitting in the front row, reached forward to squeeze her shoulder. "Doctor," Thornton, Graham's lawyer continued, "are you aware that developing romantic feelings for a patient violates medical ethics?" "I'm aware that ethics are complex," Lucian answered, "that sometimes doing the right thing means recognizing when rules and reality intersect. I'm also aware that I'm not the one who abandoned my children for a political career." "Objection!" Graham's lawyer snapped. "Withdrawn," Lucian said calmly. "But my point stands. We're here to discuss Mrs. Hale's fitness as a mother. I've witnessed that fitness firsthand, in her dedication to prenatal care, in her preparation for twins, in her ability to balance work and health. Any personal feelings I may have developed don't change those facts." The questioning continued, each answer more measured than the last. Monroe watched as Lucian handled every attempt to discredit him with grace and honesty. No denials, no excuses, just truth. Finally, Monroe's lawyer stood for cross-examination. "Dr. Thorne, in your professional opinion, what environment would best serve these children?" Lucian straightened, his voice carrying to every corner of the courtroom. "Children thrive where they are loved unconditionally, where they see strength modeled, not just talked about, where they learn that life's hardest moments can lead to its most beautiful ones." He looked directly at Graham. "They need a parent who shows them how to be brave, how to be true to themselves, how to dance even when the music seems impossible to hear." The metaphor wasn't lost on Monroe. She thought of all their careful steps, their attempted boundaries, their growing recognition that some rhythms couldn't be denied. Her hands cradled her belly as the twins moved in their own private dance. "No further questions," her lawyer said quietly. As Lucian stepped down from the witness stand, a sharp pain wrapped around Monroe's middle, different from Braxton Hicks, more intense. She must have made some small sound because both lawyers stopped, turning to look at her. "Ms. Hale," the judge leaned forward. "Are you all right?" Another pain hit, and Monroe felt something warm and wet beneath her. Her mother was instantly at her side, while Lucian moved forward, doctor's instincts overriding courtroom protocol. "Her water's broken," he announced, already checking his watch for contraction timing. "We need to get her to the hospital." Graham stood, his controlled facade cracking. "Now." "But the hearing—" "Your Honor," Monroe's lawyer interrupted. "I move for a continuance." The judge nodded, already gathering her papers. "Granted, obviously." She looked at Monroe with something like amused sympathy. "It seems your daughters have their own sense of timing. They get that from their mother," Lucian murmured, helping Monroe to her feet. The pain intensified, and Monroe gripped Lucian's arm. "I can't. The custody decision will wait," her mother said firmly. "Right now you have more important work to do." As they helped her from the courtroom, Monroe caught a glimpse of Graham's face, confused, angry, but also something else. Something that looked almost like recognition, like maybe, finally, he was seeing her clearly, not as someone to control, but as someone strong enough to choose her own path. In the courthouse hallway, between contractions, Monroe found herself laughing despite the pain. "Care to share the joke?" Lucian asked, his hand steady at her back. "Just thinking," she managed, "about all those boundaries we tried to maintain. And here we are, my water breaking in your courtroom testimony." His smile was tender as he helped her into the wheelchair a court officer had produced. "Some stories write themselves. We just have to be brave enough to live them." "Speaking of brave," Monroe gasped as another contraction hit, "I hope you're ready for this next dance. It might get messy. Together," he promised. And in that word was every step they'd taken, every boundary crossed, every truth finally spoken. As they wheeled her toward the exit, the winter sun broke through Baltimore's clouds, painting the courthouse steps in shades of gold and promise. Two stars were about to join their earthly dance, and not even Graham's lawyers could argue with that timing. Celeste and Nova were coming, ready to write their own story, to join their mother's brave dance, to prove that sometimes the most beautiful moments come just when you think all hope is lost. And in the space between one contraction and the next, Monroe found herself smiling through tears, because finally, she was exactly where she needed to be, surrounded by real love, real strength, real family. Even if it had taken 2 stubborn stars and 1 broken boundary to get her there. Time moved differently in the delivery room, measured not in minutes, but in breaths, in heartbeats, in the space between contractions. Monroe gripped the hospital bed rails, sweat darkening the loose curls around her face as another wave of pain crashed through her. "You're doing beautifully," her mother murmured, wiping Monroe's forehead with a cool cloth. "Just like we practiced." On her other side, Lucian stood in street clothes rather than his usual doctor's attire, hospital policy firmly enforced by Dr. Chen, who'd taken over Monroe's care. He couldn't be her physician today. Instead, he was simply the man who'd chosen to dance this complicated waltz with her, who now held her hand through each contraction as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "Celeste is crowning," Dr. Chen announced. "Just one more big push, Monroe." Monroe bore down, channeling every ounce of strength she had left. The room filled with the sound of her effort. Then suddenly, magnificently, a baby's cry pierced the air. "She's here," Lucian whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Monroe, she's perfect." Celeste was placed on Monroe's chest, tiny and red and absolutely beautiful. Her cries softened as Monroe touched her cheek with trembling fingers. "Hello, my little star." But there was no time to linger. Nova was ready for her entrance. The second twin arrived just 4 minutes after her sister, announcing herself with a cry even louder than Celeste's. "Definitely your daughters," Lucian said, laughing through tears as Nova was placed beside her sister. Strong voices and perfect timing. Monroe couldn't speak, overwhelmed by the sight of her daughters together at last. Celeste and Nova, named for the stars but bright enough to create their own light. Their tiny hands seemed to reach for each other, already connected by something deeper than space and time. A commotion outside the delivery room drew their attention. Through the window, Monroe caught a glimpse of Graham arguing with a nurse. He'd apparently arrived just minutes too late for the birth. Something about traffic and his lawyer's meeting running long. "Do you want me to—" Lucian started, but Monroe shook her head. "Let him wait," she said softly, watching her daughters' faces. "This moment belongs to us." Her mother squeezed her shoulder, understanding in her eyes. "I'll go talk to him. You focus on these beautiful girls." After she left, Monroe looked up at Lucian, finding in his face everything she felt: wonder, joy, and something deeper that had been growing between them since that first day in the waiting room. "They're really here," she whispered. "They really are." He perched carefully on the edge of her bed, one hand gentle on Nova's back, while the other remained twined with Monroe's. They're exactly who they're meant to be. A soft knock interrupted them. Graham stood in the doorway, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. His usual polished appearance was rumpled, his eyes fixed on the twins with an expression Monroe had never seen before. "Can I—" He swallowed hard. "Can I meet them?" Monroe studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Come say hello to your daughters." Graham approached slowly, as if afraid they might disappear. "They're so small, but mighty," Monroe said. "This is Celeste." She nodded to the baby on her left. "And this is Nova." "Star names," Graham said quietly. "You always did love the night sky." He reached out, then stopped himself. "May I?" Monroe nodded again, and Graham touched Celeste's tiny hand with surprising gentleness. The baby gripped his finger, and something in his face changed, softened, cracked, transformed. "I've been—" he started, then had to clear his throat. "I've been doing this all wrong, haven't I?" "Yes," Monroe said simply. "You have." Graham straightened, but not with his usual arrogance. "My lawyer has papers drawn up. Joint custody, generous visitation, no supervision required." He met Monroe's eyes. "If you're willing to consider it." Monroe felt Lucian tense beside her, but she squeezed his hand reassuringly. "We can talk about it later. Right now." She looked down at her daughters, perfect and new and already teaching her about love. Right now, they need their mother to rest, and their father to understand that some things can't be controlled with legal papers. Graham nodded, understanding finally reaching his eyes. "They need us to be better. For them." He glanced at Lucian, something like resignation crossing his face. "Sign all of us." After Graham left, promising to return during regular visiting hours, Monroe felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Lucian wiped them away with his thumb. "Happy tears?" he asked softly. "Grateful ones." She looked up at him. "For this moment, for these girls, for you, for us," he corrected, and leaned down to kiss her forehead. "All of us." The twins slept peacefully between them, their tiny chests rising and falling in perfect synchronization. Outside, Baltimore's winter sun broke through the clouds, painting the hospital room in shades of gold and possibility. "You know," Lucian said, watching Celeste and Nova's fingers intertwine. "I think they've been teaching us to dance all along." "Oh," Monroe smiled, exhausted but radiant. "How so?" "Step by step, heart by heart, teaching us that sometimes the most beautiful choreography is the one you couldn't plan." He touched Nova's dark curls gently. "That love isn't about perfect timing or maintained boundaries. It's about being brave enough to try," Monroe finished. "To trust, to believe in second chances and new beginnings. And third and fourth chances," Lucien added with a soft laugh. "However many it takes to get it right." The twins stirred, perhaps dreaming of their own private galaxy where they'd waited so long to join this earthly dance. Monroe held them closer, feeling Lucien's strength beside her, her mother's love in the room, and even Graham's awakening understanding. "Welcome to the dance, my little stars," she whispered to her daughters. "It's messy and complicated and absolutely beautiful, and we're all here to dance it with you." Celeste and Nova slept on, while around them love wrote its own choreography, in heartbeats and hope, in endings and beginnings, in all the perfectly imperfect steps that had led them here, to this room, this moment, this family being born not just of blood and pain, but of courage and choice and hearts brave enough to try again. In the end, it wasn't about maintaining boundaries or following rules. It was about recognizing when love was real enough to break them all, and being brave enough to let it. 1 year later, the late autumn breeze carried the scent of fallen leaves through Baltimore's Patterson Park. Monroe sat on a checkered picnic blanket, watching as Celeste and Nova took wobbly steps in the grass, their first birthday dresses matching the golden afternoon light. At 12 months old, the twins were already showing distinct personalities. Celeste, thoughtful and observant, holding onto her sister's hand. Nova, bold and laughing, leading their shared adventure. "They're getting faster," Lucien said, settling beside her with 2 cups of coffee from their favorite cart. "Soon they'll be outrunning both of us." "Already are." Monroe accepted her cup, cream, no sugar, the way she'd taken it since those midnight grocery store meetings. Her gold earrings caught the sunlight as she leaned against his shoulder. "Though I notice you still managed to catch them before they raid your medical journals. Professional hazard." He wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her closer. "Can't have them learning anatomy before ABCs." They watched as the twins discovered a pile of leaves, their delighted squeals drawing smiles from passing joggers. Monroe's mother, visiting for the birthday celebration, helped them throw handfuls of red and gold into the air. "Graham called this morning," Monroe said softly. "Wanted to confirm next weekend's visit. He's taking them to the aquarium." "With Veronica?" "No, just him." Monroe smiled slightly. "And he said he wants to really see them, not just check a box on his custody agreement." The past year had been a dance of its own, learning to co-parent, to share holidays, to put the twins first. Graham had surprised them all, showing up for doctor's appointments and milestone moments, slowly becoming the father he'd never planned to be. Speaking of agreements, Lucien shifted, suddenly nervous. Dr. Chen mentioned the practice is expanding. "They're looking for a new OB/GYN. Monroe turned to face him. "Oh, I'm thinking of transferring. Different hospital, different ethics board." His eyes met hers. "No more professional boundaries to navigate." "You love Baltimore Memorial," Monroe said softly. "Your whole career. I love you more." The words were simple, certain. "You and the girls. Besides," his smile turned playful, "the new hospital is closer to a certain middle school. Better for impromptu lunch dates between surgeries." Monroe's heart skipped, the way it still did when he looked at her like that. "You're sure? About changing hospitals?" "Yes." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. "About this, absolutely certain." The ring caught the autumn light, not a diamond, but 2 small stars, their points touching. Monroe's breath caught as Lucien shifted to one knee on their picnic blanket. "I had a whole speech planned," he said, "about constellations and timing and love that breaks all the rules. But looking at you now, with our girls dancing in the leaves," he took her hand, "I just want to ask, will you dance with me, every day, for the rest of our lives?" Tears blurred Monroe's vision as she nodded. "Yes, 1,000 times, yes." The twins, as if sensing the moment, tottered over to tumble into their laps. Nova reached for the ring box while Celeste patted her mother's cheeks, catching her happy tears. "Look, little stars," Monroe whispered as Lucien slipped the ring onto her finger. "Daddy's asking us to dance forever." "Da-da, dance!" Nova declared, while Celeste clapped her tiny hands. Monroe's mother appeared with her phone, capturing the moment. Their little family tangled together on a picnic blanket, autumn leaves swirling around them like nature's confetti. Perfect in its imperfection, beautiful in its truth. Later that evening, after the twins were asleep in their cribs and Baltimore's lights twinkled like earthbound stars, Monroe and Lucian swayed together in their kitchen. No music played except the rhythm of their hearts, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the distant lullaby of city life. "Remember when we tried so hard not to fall in love?" Monroe asked, her head on his chest. "So worst choreography ever," Lucian murmured into her hair. "Thank God our daughters knew better." Through the kitchen window, Celeste and Nova's namesakes shone bright in the clear night sky. Below, in a small Baltimore home filled with children's toys and medical textbooks, crayon drawings and coffee mugs, two people who'd once been afraid to trust love held each other close. And they danced. Not perfectly, not according to any rules or boundaries or carefully maintained distances, but truly, deeply, with all the courage and joy their daughters had taught them to find. They danced like stars finding their orbit, like hearts finding their home, like love finally, beautifully, eternally breaking free. A message to our viewers. What would you risk for love? Would you break boundaries, face fears, dance beyond the safety of carefully drawn lines? Your participation in this channel means everything to us. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. What did Monroe and Lucian's story teach you about love, courage, and the beauty of beginning again? Remember, sometimes the bravest dance is the one that breaks all the rules. And sometimes, just sometimes, that's exactly the dance your heart needs to learn. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.